The cold came off Lake Superior like a living thing that January morning, the kind of cold that turned breath into ice crystals before it left your lungs. Duluth wore winter like a second skin, hard and unforgiving, the waterfront district especially so. Abandoned buildings lined the old industrial corridor, relics of a time when iron ore and timber moved through these docks by the ton, when the railway stations hummed with purpose and the harbor never slept. Harbinger Station had not hummed in 40 years. The building sat 300 yards from the active docks, a hulking three-story brick structure with most of its windows gone and its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. The city had condemned it in 2014. Graham Kellerman, who owned half the derelict waterfront properties through various shell companies and investment vehicles, had been trying to demolish it for 5 years. The preservationists kept blocking him. The Historical Society kept filing appeals. The structure kept standing, barely, a monument to bureaucratic stalemate and the stubborn refusal of the past to simply go away quietly. Tommy Oakes did not care about preservation politics or development plans. He cared about staying warm and finishing his patrol so he could clock out and go home to his apartment where the heat worked and his girlfriend would have coffee ready. He worked night security for Duluth Marine Services, which meant walking the perimeter of the active docks every 4 hours and checking the condemned buildings for trespassers, vagrants, or kids stupid enough to ignore the danger signs. He had walked this route 200 times. He knew every chain-link fence, every padlocked gate, every broken window. He knew Harbinger Station was supposed to be empty. That morning at 6:43, with the sky still dark and the temperature sitting at 8 degrees below zero, he noticed the side door hanging open. Not broken, not forced, just open, as if someone had walked through and forgotten to pull it shut behind them. Tommy stopped on the cracked asphalt 20 feet away, his breath clouding white in the beam of his flashlight. The door moved slightly in the wind, creaking on hinges that should have been secured. He radioed it in. Dispatch told him to wait for police. He did not wait. Tommy Oakes had made questionable decisions before, small ones mostly, the kind that accumulated on a record without adding up to anything serious. He did not think of himself as brave or stupid. He just wanted to check quickly, report back, and not spend the next 40 minutes standing in the cold waiting for a squad car. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, not decay, not exactly, but something cold and chemical and wrong. The interior of Harbinger Station was a cavern of shadows, the high ceiling lost in darkness, the concrete floor littered with debris and broken glass. His flashlight beam swept across overturned furniture, graffiti-covered walls, and the skeletal remains of ticket counters that had not sold passage in decades. He called out, his voice echoed and died. Tommy moved deeper into the building, past the main waiting area and toward the old administrative offices. The cold inside felt different than outside, stiller, heavier, as if the building itself held onto winter and refused to let it circulate. He swept his light across doorways and alcoves, seeing nothing but emptiness and ruin. Then his beam found the figure. A man sat upright against the far wall of what had once been the station master's office, his back straight, his legs extended, his hands resting in his lap. For one frozen moment, Tommy thought the man was sleeping, perhaps homeless, perhaps drunk, perhaps just waiting out the cold. Then the light caught the face, pale and waxy, the eyes half open and unseeing, the mouth slack. Then it caught the dark stain spreading across the concrete behind the head. Tommy dropped his flashlight. It clattered on the floor, the beam spinning wild patterns across the walls before settling at an angle that illuminated the dead man in stark relief. Tommy fumbled for his radio with shaking hands. This time he waited. Detective Sarah Linden arrived at Harbinger Station at 7:36, 40 minutes after the first patrol unit secured the scene. She parked her unmarked sedan behind 2 squad cars and a fire department vehicle, their emergency lights painting the brick facade in rotating red and blue. The sun had started to rise, but the light felt thin and unconvincing, doing little to soften the building's brutal angles. She had been in Duluth for 4 months. The transfer from Minneapolis homicide had been her idea, though calling it an idea suggested more agency than she felt at the time. After her partner died, after the shooting and the funerals and the administrative review that cleared her of wrongdoing but not guilt, she needed distance. Duluth offered that. Fewer homicides, slower pace, different ghosts. Detective Ray Kowalski met her at the entrance, a coffee in each hand. He was 56, Duluth born and raised, a man who knew every bar owner and city councilman by first name. He handed her one of the cups without preamble. "Body is in the back office," he said. "Male, late 30s, no identification on scene initially. Dock worker found him about an hour ago. Coroner is inside now." "Cause?" Linden asked. "Blunt force trauma, back of the skull. Blood spatter suggests it happened somewhere else in the building. Body was moved." They walked through the side door, now propped open with a cinder block, and into the cold hollow of the station. Crime scene techs had set up portable lights that threw harsh white illumination across the waiting area. Linden could see the footprints in the dust, the careful markers placed by the evidence team, the photographer documenting every angle. The station master's office was at the end of a narrow corridor lined with doors that hung crooked on broken hinges. Yellow tape marked the entrance. Inside, the coroner, Dr. Emil Voss, knelt beside the body, speaking quietly into a handheld recorder. The victim looked younger than late 30s, Linden thought, or perhaps death had softened him. He wore a heavy canvas jacket, thermal pants, winter boots. His face was pale, lips faintly blue, eyes half closed as if he had decided to rest and simply never woken. The blood behind his head had frozen into a dark, irregular stain that spread across the concrete and up the wall. "Preliminary thoughts?" Linden asked. Voss looked up, his face lined with the particular weariness of a man who had seen too many bodies pulled from Lake Superior or found frozen in alleys. Single blow, significant force, probably a blunt object with some weight behind it. The cold makes time of death tricky. Body temperature is ambient, rigor is set, but that could be the freeze. Based on lividity and environmental factors, I would estimate 12 to 18 hours, maybe more. "So yesterday evening, late afternoon at the earliest," Kowalski said. "That would be consistent," Voss agreed. He gestured toward the victim's hands, which rested loosely in his lap. "One other thing, he was holding this when we found him." He held up an evidence bag. Inside was a small brass object, perhaps 4 inches long, ornately engraved with scrollwork and markings. It took Linden a moment to recognize it as a tool of some kind, with a sharp punch tip on one end and a handle designed to fit comfortably in a palm. "A punch," Voss said, "for making holes in paper or cardstock. Antique, well-maintained. You can see the engraving here." He turned the bag so the light caught the inscription, HS 1947. "Harbinger Station," Kowalski said quietly. "Most likely," Voss replied. "Railway inspectors used tools like this to authenticate documents, punch tickets, validate cargo manifests. Each inspector had a unique pattern so the holes could not be forged. This one is from 1947, if the date is accurate." Linden took the bag, turning it over in her hands. The tool felt heavy even through the plastic, solid and purposeful. Why would he be holding it? "That," Voss said, "is your question to answer." They found the victim's wallet 20 feet away, near an overturned filing cabinet. Inside, a driver's license identifying him as Marcus Trent, age 38, address in the residential neighborhoods near Spirit Mountain. Credit cards, a library card, $43 in cash. No phone, though they found the shattered remains of what might have been a smartphone near the wallet, the screen obliterated, the internal components crushed. "Someone did not want us looking at his communications," Kowalski observed. Linden crouched beside the phone fragments, careful not to disturb them. The deliberate destruction suggested premeditation, or at least presence of mind after the fact. That argued against a crime of pure passion, a sudden explosion of violence. This had been considered, even if only for seconds. Near the body, scattered across the floor, were several pieces of white cardstock, each roughly the size of a business card. Linden knelt and examined them without touching. Each card bore several small, precisely punched holes arranged in a pattern. The holes were clean, professional, made with intention. "Bag these," she told the nearest tech, "all of them, and photograph the pattern before you move anything." Kowalski stood in the doorway, surveying the room. "So we have a man found in a condemned building, killed elsewhere and moved here, clutching an antique tool, with his phone destroyed and a handful of punched cards nearby. What are we looking at?" "We are looking at someone who came here for a reason," Linden said, "and someone else who did not want him to leave." The crime scene search took 4 hours. They found blood spatter in 2 other locations within the building, a heavy concentration near an interior wall on the 2nd floor, and drag marks leading from there down a service stairwell to the office where the body had been positioned. The pattern was clear. Marcus Trent had been struck on the 2nd floor, rendered unconscious or dead, then dragged to the office and arranged with his back to the wall. Why, Linden wondered, why move him at all? Why position him that way, almost carefully, as if someone had wanted to make him comfortable? They found Marcus's camera on the 2nd floor, a professional-grade digital model with a telephoto lens, sitting on a windowsill as if he had set it down intending to pick it up again. The memory card was missing. The battery was dead. There were no other significant pieces of evidence in the immediate area, no convenient dropped wallets or monogrammed handkerchiefs. Whoever had killed Marcus Trent had been thorough. By early afternoon, Linden and Kowalski stood outside in the weak winter sunlight, watching the coroner's van pull away with the body. The temperature had climbed to 15 degrees. The wind off the lake cut through every layer. "What do you know about this building?" Linden asked. Kowalski shrugged. Built in the 20s, served the iron or rail lines until the 60s, closed when the routes shifted, been empty ever since, more or less. Kellerman owns it now, wants to tear it down and put up condos or retail or something. The historical people keep blocking him. Kellerman. Graham Kellerman, developer, big money, big connections, owns half the old waterfront. He has been trying to demolish this place for years, but every time he gets close, someone files an appeal or finds some historical significance to preserve. It drives him crazy. Linden looked up at the building's facade, the broken windows, the crumbling brick. What is worth preserving? History, supposedly. The preservationists say it is architecturally significant, part of Duluth's industrial heritage. Kellerman says it is a safety hazard and an eyesore. They have been fighting about it since 2014. Do we know if Marcus Trent had any connection to that fight? Not yet, Kowalski said, but we are about to find out. Marcus Trent's apartment was a small 2-bedroom unit in a converted house near Spirit Mountain, the kind of place where the heat worked intermittently, and the landlord responded to maintenance requests on his own schedule. The building manager let them in after they showed identification and explained the situation. She was a woman in her 60s who wore a bathrobe over sweatpants and seemed unsurprised by police presence. "He kept to himself," she said, unlocking the door. "Paid rent on time, never complained, never had parties. I barely saw him." The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books. The living room was small and cluttered, but the clutter was organized, purposeful. One entire wall was covered with photographs, diagrams, and printed documents, all pinned to a massive corkboard that dominated the space. Linden stepped closer, her eyes scanning the collage. Harbinger Station. Every photograph showed the building from different angles, different times of day, different seasons. exterior shots capturing the deteriorating facade, interior shots revealing empty rooms and collapsed ceilings, close-ups of architectural details, decorative metalwork, carved wooden trim that had somehow survived decades of neglect. But the photographs were only part of it. Interspersed among the images were printed property records, historical documents, architectural blueprints, and newspaper clippings. Linden lined in and read the headlines. Railway fraud scandal rocks Duluth, 1947. Inspector testifies against organized crime. Missing railway official feared dead. Carrick disappearance remains unsolved. Kowalski stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. He was researching the building's history. Not just researching, Linden said, obsessing. They spent the next hour documenting everything. Marcus's computer sat on a desk in the corner, password protected. They bagged it for the tech team. His bookshelves held volumes on railway history, industrial architecture, and true crime. His filing cabinet contained folders organized by year, each filled with photocopied documents from historical archives and libraries. In the bedroom, they found a journal on the nightstand. Linden opened it carefully, reading the neat handwriting that filled page after page. The entries were dated, methodical, detailed. Marcus wrote about his research into Harbinger Station, his attempts to access city archives, his interviews with elderly residents who remembered the building in its operational years. He wrote about the 1947 scandal, about an inspector named James Carrick who had exposed corruption and then vanished without trace. The most recent entries were from the week before his death. January 14, archive request denied again. They will not let me see the original manifests. Something is being hidden. January 16, met with private collector, confirmed the punch tool exists, payment arranged. January 18, verification process nearly complete. Once I have the original records, the proof will be irrefutable. January 20, meeting at the station tomorrow, final proof. This will change everything. January 21st was the day Marcus died. Linden read the entry again, then showed it to Kowalski. He was meeting someone. Someone who killed him, Kowalski said. Or someone who was there when he was killed, Linden replied. We need to find out who else knew about his research. They left the apartment with more questions than answers, the journal bagged as evidence, the corkboard photographed in its entirety. As they drove back toward the station, Linden's phone rang. The caller ID showed the medical examiner's office. Detective Linden, she answered. Sarah, it is Emil Voss. I have preliminary autopsy findings. You will want to hear this. Go ahead. Time of death is confirmed between 4 and 8 yesterday evening, January 21st. Cause of death is blunt force trauma to the occipital region of the skull, consistent with a single blow from a heavy object, possibly a piece of timber or metal pipe. The force was significant, suggesting either a strong assailant or one with leverage. The victim was likely unconscious immediately and dead within minutes. Anything else? Yes, toxicology is still pending, but I found something unusual. The victim's right hand showed signs of a defensive wound, a bruise across the palm consistent with gripping something tightly at the time of death or shortly before. That matches the brass punch tool we found. He was holding it when he died, not after. Linden processed that, so he had the tool with him, grabbed it during the attack or right before, and held onto it even as he was killed. That is consistent with my findings, Voss said. One more thing, I examined the punch tool more closely. It shows signs of recent use. There are microscopic paper fibers in the punch mechanism and faint traces of ink on the handle. Someone used this tool recently, probably within the last few days. Marcus, Most likely, the question is why. After the call ended, Linden sat in silence, watching the city roll past outside the car window. Snow had begun to fall again, light flakes that melted on contact with the windshield. "We need to talk to people who knew him," she said finally. "Family, friends, ex-girlfriends, anyone who might know what he was working on and who he was meeting." Kowalski nodded. "I will pull his phone records, see if we can recover anything from the destroyed phone, and we should talk to Kellerman." The developer. Marcus was obsessed with his building. If Marcus was making noise about historical preservation, Kellerman would know about it, and Kellerman does not strike me as someone who handles obstacles gently. They started with Alina Vasquez. According to Marcus's emergency contact information, Alina was his former girlfriend. They had dated for 2 years and broken up 8 months ago. She worked as an architect for a firm downtown, a position that suggested professional success and stability. Linden called ahead to schedule an interview. Alina met them in a conference room at her office, a modern space with glass walls and minimalist furniture. She was 35, composed, dressed in professional attire that suggested she had come directly from a meeting. Her eyes were red, though, and she twisted a tissue between her hands as she sat across from them. "I heard about Marcus on the news," she said. "They did not release his name yet, but I just knew." "When was the last time you saw him?" Linden asked gently. 8 months ago when we broke up. We ended things amicably, or as amicably as those things go. We wanted different futures. I wanted stability, a career, maybe a family eventually. Marcus wanted to chase history, document abandoned buildings, live on grants and freelance work. It was not sustainable. "Did you stay in contact after the breakup?" Alina hesitated, then nodded. "He called me once about 3 weeks ago. It was late, almost midnight. He was excited about something, talking fast, the way he did when he was onto a new project. He said he had found something important at Harbinger station, something that would stop the demolition." "What did he find?" "He did not say exactly. He wanted me to see it, but I told him no. I was done with his obsessions, done with abandoned buildings and historical crusades. I thought he was exaggerating, seeing significance where there was none. He did that sometimes, saw conspiracies and cover-ups and bureaucratic delays." She looked down at the tissue in her hands. "I thought he was being dramatic. I did not take him seriously." "Did he mention meeting anyone else?" Kowalski asked. "Not specifically. He mentioned trying to access city archives, being blocked by red tape. He said something about private collectors and verification, but it was all vague. Marcus liked to be mysterious about his projects until he had everything perfect." Linden watched Elena's face carefully. "Do you know if Marcus had any enemies, anyone who might want to harm him?" "No, Marcus was gentle, quiet. He did not make enemies. He made people indifferent, maybe annoyed by his persistence, but not violent." "What about your firm?" Linden asked. "You are an architect. Do you have any connection to the Harbinger station property?" Alina's face shifted, something tightening around her eyes. "My firm handles the architectural assessments for several of Graham Kellerman's properties. Harbinger Station is one of them. We filed the structural reports that support the demolition permits." "Did Marcus know that?" "Yes, it was part of the reason we broke up. He accused me of helping destroy history. I told him I was doing my job, following the code, making professional assessments. We could not get past it." They thanked Alina and left her sitting in the conference room, staring at the glass wall as if she could see through it to some other version of events where she had taken Marcus seriously, where she had met him that night, where things had gone differently. Graham Kellerman agreed to meet them at his office, a suite on the top floor of a renovated warehouse building overlooking the harbor. He was 51, broad-shouldered with silver hair and the kind of tan that suggested recent travel to warmer climates. He did not stand when they entered, merely gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "I assume this is about the trespasser found dead in my building," he said without preamble. "Marcus Trent," Linden said. "Did you know him?" "I knew of him, urban explorer, photographer, preservation advocate. He trespassed on my properties multiple times. I had my attorneys send him cease and desist letters twice. He ignored them." "When was the last time you saw him?" "I never saw him. I only knew about him through security reports and legal correspondence. My properties are monitored. He showed up on cameras several times, always after dark, always alone. I considered a restraining order, but my attorneys advised it was not worth the effort." "Were you aware that he was researching the history of Harbinger Station?" Kowalski asked. Kellerman leaned back in his chair. "I was aware he had some obsession with the building, yes. He contacted the Historical Society, filed appeals against my demolition permits, wrote letters to the city council. It was annoying but ultimately meaningless. The building is a safety hazard. It would be demolished in 3 weeks, appeals or not." "Does it bother you that someone died there?" Linden asked, keeping her tone neutral. Kellerman's expression did not change. "Of course it bothers me. I am not a monster, but the man was trespassing. If he had stayed out of condemned buildings, he would still be alive. That is not my responsibility." "Where were you 2 nights ago, between 4 and 8 in the evening?" "At a city council meeting until 6, then dinner with my wife and business partners at the boat club until 9. You can verify with the restaurant and with everyone present." They would, but Linden suspected the alibi would hold. Kellerman was too careful, too connected, to make mistakes that obvious. As they left the building, Kowalski muttered, "That man is not losing sleep over Marcus Trent." "No," Linden agreed, "but someone is." They returned to the police station and began pulling together everything they had. Marcus's journal, the punch tool, the punched cards, the phone records, the photographs, the witness statements. Linden spread it all across her desk, looking for connections, for patterns, for the thread that would pull it all into focus. The punch tool sat in its evidence bag, the engraving catching the fluorescent light. HS 1947, Harbinger Station 1947, the year of the railway scandal, the year an inspector vanished. Linden opened Marcus's journal again, reading through the entries more slowly. He had been meticulous, documenting every step of his research. He had visited the city archives multiple times, requesting access to original railway manifests and inspector reports. He had been denied repeatedly, told the documents were restricted or unavailable. But someone had given him access, or at least pointed him in the right direction. The private collector mentioned in his journal, payment arranged. "Who sells antique railway tools?" Linden asked aloud. Kowalski looked up from his computer. "Collectors, historians, maybe antique dealers. Why?" Marcus wrote about arranging payment with a private collector. He was buying the punch tool or access to something connected to it. If we find the collector, we find someone who knew what Marcus was researching. "I will start calling antique dealers and historical societies," Kowalski said. "See if anyone remembers selling or discussing a railway punch tool recently." Linden nodded, but her attention was back on the punched cards. They had bagged 7 cards total, each with a different pattern of holes. The patterns looked random at first, but when she laid them out side by side, she noticed something. The holes were not centered on the cards. They were positioned deliberately, clustered in specific areas, as if marking coordinates or locations. She pulled up a photo of the Harbinger Station floor plan on her computer, one of the architectural diagrams from Marcus's apartment. Then she held the cards up to the screen. one by one, trying to align the hole patterns with the building's layout. It took 15 minutes, but finally she saw it. The holes on each card corresponded to specific locations within Harbinger Station. Rooms, corridors, structural features. Marcus had been marking places, using the punch tool to create a map of sorts, a coded guide to something inside the building. "Ray," she said quietly, "we need to go back to Harbinger Station tonight." Kowalski looked at her over his monitor. "What are we looking for?" "Whatever Marcus found," Linden said, "whatever was worth dying for." The snow fell heavier as they drove back to the waterfront, the city disappearing into white static, the harbor lost in darkness. Harbinger Station loomed against the night sky, a black silhouette with empty windows that reflected nothing. They parked and walked through the side door, their flashlights cutting paths through the cold interior. Linden carried the punched cards in her jacket pocket, along with a printout of the building's floor plan. She moved through the waiting area and up the service stairs to the second floor, Kowalski behind her, both of them silent except for the crunch of debris under their boots. The second floor was a maze of small offices and storage rooms, most with doors missing or hanging crooked. Linden stopped in what had been the administrative wing and pulled out the first card, comparing the whole pattern to the floor plan. "This way," she said, moving down a narrow corridor. They found the first location in a room that had once been a records office. The walls were lined with empty shelving, the floor covered in water-stained paper and broken furniture. Linden swept her light across the space, looking for anything that matched Marcus's interest, anything that seemed significant. Nothing. She tried the second card, then the third, moving through the building methodically, checking each location the holes indicated. Most were empty, unremarkable, offering no clues. Then in a small office near the back of the second floor, her flashlight beam caught something that did not belong. A section of the wall paneling hung slightly crooked, as if it had been removed and replaced imperfectly. Linden stepped closer, examining the edges. "Help me with this," she said. Together they pulled the panel away from the wall. Behind it was a shallow cavity, perhaps 8 inches deep, carved into the brick. Inside the cavity was a metal case, old but intact, its surface covered in a thin layer of rust and dust. Kowalski pulled on gloves and lifted the case out carefully. It was heavy, locked with a simple clasp that had corroded over the decades but still held. He worked it open with a flathead screwdriver, the metal squealing in protest. Inside were papers, documents preserved in wax paper, protected from moisture and decay. Linden lifted them out gently, unfolding the brittle pages under her flashlight beam. Railway manifests, inspector reports, cargo certifications, all dated 1947, all signed by an inspector named James Carrick, and all marked with the distinctive hole pattern of a punch tool. But there was more. Beneath the official documents were handwritten ledgers, pages filled with names and numbers and dates. Linden recognized some of the names from Marcus's research: prominent Duluth families, business owners, city officials. And in the margin of one page, a single word written in faded ink: Kellerman. Kowalski read over her shoulder, his breath visible in the cold. "This is what Marcus found." "This is why he died," Linden said. They stood in the dark office, surrounded by decades of silence, holding papers that connected the past to the present in ways neither of them fully understood yet. But one thing was clear: Marcus Trent had uncovered something people did not want uncovered, and someone had killed him to keep it buried. The investigation was just beginning. Detective Sarah Linden stood in the reading room of the Duluth County Archives building, surrounded by leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and old paper. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the long wooden tables. Outside, sleet tapped against tall windows overlooking the frozen harbor. It was the morning after they had found Marcus Trent's body, and she needed context. Dr. Patricia Horn arrived 15 minutes later, carrying a worn leather briefcase. The historian was 73 years old, but moved with the purposeful energy of someone half her age. She wore a wool coat that had seen better decades and practical rubber boots caked with road salt. "Detective," she said, extending a gloved hand, "you said this was about Marcus Trent." "You knew him," Linden said. It was not quite a question. "I did." Dr. Horn removed her gloves slowly, deliberately. "We corresponded about Harbinger Station. He was interested in the building's history. Architecturally significant, you understand. One of the last remaining examples of that particular railway design in the upper Midwest." They sat at one of the long tables. Kowalski stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the street below. "Tell me about the punch tool," Linden said. Dr. Horn opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder thick with photocopied documents. Railway inspectors used them for authentication. Each inspector had a unique punch pattern. When they certified cargo manifests or shipping documents, they would punch holes in specific configurations. Impossible to forge, you see. Each pattern was registered with the railway company. She spread several documents across the table. Linden leaned forward, studying the yellowed papers. Some showed whole patterns along the margins, small circular punctures arranged in sequences. "This system was used from the 1880s through the 1950s, Dr. Horn continued. Harbinger Station was a major freight depot. Cargo came through from the Iron Range, from Canada, from ships on Superior. Everything required certification. And the tool we found was dated 1947, Linden said. That year is significant. Dr. Horn pulled out a newspaper clipping sealed in a plastic sleeve. The headline read, "Railway Inspector Testifies in Freight Fraud Case." The photograph showed a thin man in a suit standing on courthouse steps, his face serious, worn. "James Carrick," Dr. Horn said. "He worked at Harbinger Station for 12 years. In 1947, he discovered systematic fraud. Cargo manifests were being falsified. Inspectors were taking bribes to certify shipments that either did not exist or contained contraband. Black market goods, stolen property, materials diverted from legitimate channels." Kowalski turned from the window. "How much money are we talking about?" "In today's currency, millions." Dr. Horn tapped the photograph. Carrick was the whistleblower. He testified before a grand jury, provided documentation, named names. The investigation reached into city government, into shipping companies, into organized crime networks. "What happened to him?" Linden asked, though she already suspected the answer. "He disappeared 3 months after the trial ended. October 1947. Never seen again. His body was never recovered. The official conclusion was that he fled, possibly feared retaliation. But people who knew him said that made no sense. He had a wife, 2 young children. He was not the type to abandon them." Dr. Horn pulled out another document, this one a list of names typed on brittle paper. "These are the individuals convicted or implicated in the fraud case. Most served minimal sentences. A few paid fines. The entire matter was quietly buried within 2 years." Linden scanned the list. One name near the bottom made her pause. Gerald Kellerman, dock supervisor. "Graham Kellerman's grandfather," she said. "Yes." Dr. Horn's expression was neutral, but her eyes held something harder. "The Kellerman family has been prominent in Duluth shipping and development for 3 generations. Gerald was never formally charged, but Carrick's testimony mentioned him specifically. Gerald took early retirement shortly after the trial. The family shifted into real estate development in the 1950s. Kowalski moved closer to the table. "You think Marcus Trent knew about this?" I know he did, Dr. Horn said. He contacted me 4 months ago, wanted to know everything about the fraud case, about James Carrick, about what happened to the inspector's records. I told him what I knew. I gave him copies of these documents. He was particularly interested in Carrick's punch tool. Why? Linden asked. Because it was never recovered. Carrick had it with him the day he disappeared. Some people believed he hid evidence somewhere, documentation that would prove the conspiracy went deeper than the official investigation revealed. The punch tool would authenticate any such documents. Linden thought of Marcus Trent's apartment, the walls covered with photographs and diagrams. He was searching for it. I believe so. He became somewhat obsessed. He asked if I thought the evidence might still be hidden in Harbinger Station. I told him it was possible, but unlikely. The building had been searched multiple times over the years, but Marcus was convinced. He said he had found something in the architectural plans, some inconsistency that suggested hidden spaces. Did you believe him? Dr. Horn hesitated. I thought he was letting his imagination run ahead of the facts, but he was thorough. He studied every document, every photograph. If there was something to find, Marcus would have found it. Linden looked at the photograph of James Carrick again. The man's eyes stared back across 70 years, serious and determined. Who else knew Marcus was looking into this? I could not say for certain. He mentioned speaking with people at the Historical Society. He tried to access property records at City Hall but was denied, something about the documents being part of sealed legal files. Sealed what? The fraud case settlement included confidentiality agreements. Certain records remain restricted. Kowalski made a note in his phone. Convenient. They spent another hour reviewing documents. Dr. Horn walked them through the fraud scheme, explaining how falsified cargo certifications allowed illegal goods to move through legitimate channels. The network had been sophisticated, involving railway employees, dock supervisors, warehouse managers, and shipping company executives. The people convicted were mostly lower-level employees, Dr. Horn explained. The investigation never reached the top. Many believed there was political pressure to limit the scope. Several prominent families had potential exposure. Including the Kellermans, Linden said. Among others, but yes, Graham Kellerman would have reason to prefer this history stay buried. Bad publicity at minimum. At worst, it could affect his business relationships, his political connections. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Horn touched Linden's arm. Detective, I respected Marcus. He was serious about history, about truth. If he found something important, people would want it to stay hidden. Be careful. Outside, the sleet had turned to light snow. Linden and Kowalski walked to their car in silence. You think Kellerman is involved? Kowalski finally asked. I think we need to find out what Marcus discovered. They drove to the print shop where the punched cards had been purchased. The owner was a nervous man in his 50s who kept adjusting his glasses while he spoke. Yeah, I remember him, he said when shown Marcus's photograph. Came in about 3 weeks ago. Wanted high-grade cardstock, specific weight and texture. Said he was doing an art project about historical documents. How many cards? Linden asked. 20 sheets cut into quarters, so 80 cards total. Did he say what he planned to do with them? Not exactly, but he asked if the cardstock could withstand being punched without tearing. I told him as long as he used a proper tool, it should be fine. He showed me this old brass punch thing, asked if I thought it would work. I said sure, looked well made. Kowalski showed him a photograph of the railway punch tool. This one. Yeah, that is it, real antique piece. I asked where he got it. He just smiled, said it was on loan from a friend. Back in the car, Linden called the forensics lab. The analyst who answered sounded tired. "We finished with the cards," she said. "Definitely modern cardstock, but the punch pattern matches the tool found with the victim. Each hole is identical in diameter and spacing." "What about the writing on them?" "Handwritten in pencil, probably by the victim based on initial comparison to samples from his apartment. They are coordinates, GPS coordinates to be specific, and dates." "Can you send me the list?" "Already in your email." Linden pulled up the message on her phone. 8 sets of coordinates, each paired with a date ranging from mid-December to early January. She entered the first set into her mapping application. "They are all in or around Harbinger station," she said. Kowalski started the engine. He was mapping something inside the building. They returned to the station, this time with proper lighting equipment and a structural engineer Kowalski knew from a previous case. The engineer was a stocky woman named Rita Chen who wore a hard hat and carried a tablet loaded with building schematics. "Station was built in 1922, she said as they entered through the side door police had secured after the body's discovery. Reinforced concrete and steel frame, brick facade. It has been condemned for structural issues, water damage, foundation settling, but the bones are solid." They moved through the dim interior. Linden's flashlight beam swept across graffitied walls and debris-strewn floors. The air smelled of mold and rust. Wind whistled through broken windows. "Where do you want to start?" Chen asked. Linden checked the coordinates on her phone. Northwest corner, ground level. They picked their way through collapsed ceiling tiles and puddles of stagnant water. The northwest corner was a former office area, walls still showing the outlines of removed fixtures. Linden compared the coordinates to their position. "Should be right here," she said, standing near a section of wall covered in peeling paint. Chen examined the wall, tapping it with a small hammer. The sound changed slightly in one area, becoming more hollow. She ran a handheld scanner across the surface. "There is a void behind this," she said, "about 8 inches deep, maybe 3 feet square." Kowalski found a pry bar in their equipment kit. "We authorized to open it up." "It is a crime scene," Linden said, "and potential evidence, yes." He worked the pry bar into a seam where the paint had already cracked. The wall panel was older plaster over wood lath. It came away in chunks, revealing a dark cavity behind. Linden aimed her flashlight into the opening. At the back of the void, something reflected the light. A metal case about the size of a briefcase sat wedged against the inner brick wall. Chen helped Linden carefully extract it. The case was old, but had been wrapped in what looked like waxed canvas, protection against moisture. They carried it outside to better light. The case had no lock, just a simple latch mechanism. Linden opened it slowly. Inside were ledgers, 3 of them bound in cracked leather, pages yellowed but intact. And beneath the ledgers, wrapped in cloth, were several brass railway punch tools, each with different engraving patterns. "Holy hell," Kowalski said quietly. Linden photographed everything before touching it. Then she carefully opened one of the ledgers. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, columns of figures, dates, cargo descriptions. Some entries were marked with small punched holes along the margins. "Shipping records," Chen said, looking over her shoulder. But not just any records. As Linden paged through, she saw discrepancies. 2 entries for the same cargo manifest, one showing legitimate goods, the other showing what actually shipped. Names in the margins, payments noted in code, and punch certifications, different patterns indicating which inspector had authenticated which documents. One of the brass tools in the case was engraved HS 1947, identical to the one found in Marcus Trent's hand. James Carrick's evidence, Linden said. This is what he hid. They spent the next 2 days in careful analysis. The ledgers were photographed, each page documented. A forensic accountant was brought in to decipher the coded payments. Dr. Horn was called to help interpret the historical context. The picture that emerged was damning. The fraud network had been larger than the original investigation revealed. Prominent names appeared repeatedly. Gerald Kellerman's name was there, associated with dozens of falsified certifications. But there were others, family names still prominent in Duluth business circles. This would have destroyed people, the accountant said, reviewing the documents in a secure conference room. Not just criminally, socially, financially. These families built empires on this foundation. Linden sat across from Dr. Horn. You said Marcus contacted you 4 months ago. Did he say why he started looking into this now? He mentioned reading something about the upcoming demolition of Harbinger Station. He was documenting abandoned buildings, and Harbinger was on his list. But when he researched its history, he became interested in the fraud case. He said something about how buildings hold secrets, how architecture can hide things in plain sight. He found the hiding place, Kowalski said, probably during one of his photography sessions. Noticed something off about the wall dimensions, checked the structural plans, realized there was dead space that should not be there. And then what? Linden asked. He broke in at night, opened the wall, found the case. He would have needed help, Chen said. Opening that wall properly, getting the case out without damaging it, that takes tools and time. He could not do it alone in a condemned building without attracting attention. Linden thought of Tommy Oakes, the dock worker who had been nervous and evasive during his interview. Tommy worked security rounds that included the condemned waterfront properties. He would have access. He would know when the buildings were unmonitored. Bring Tommy in again, she told Kowalski. This time Tommy arrived with a public defender, a young woman who looked barely out of law school. They sat in the same interview room, but the atmosphere was different. Tommy's nervous energy had calcified into something harder, more defensive. My client has already provided a statement, the lawyer said. And now we have new evidence that suggests that statement was incomplete, Linden replied. She placed a photograph on the table. It showed the metal case sitting in the wall cavity, taken before they removed it. Tommy stared at the image, his jaw tightened. Marcus Trent did not find this alone, Linden said. He needed someone with access to the building, someone who could help him work without being noticed, someone who knew the security schedules. I do not know anything about that, Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. You told us Marcus contacted you to buy drugs. That was a lie. He contacted you because you had something he needed, access. The lawyer leaned close to Tommy and whispered something. He shook his head slightly. Linden continued, we have evidence Marcus made payments to you, small amounts consistent with hiring someone for labor. We have your work schedule, which shows you had access to Harbinger Station on the nights when we believed the wall was open. And we have your contradictory statements. Contradictory how? The lawyer asked. Your client said he saw Marcus the night before the murder and that Marcus wanted to buy drugs. But Marcus's bank records show no cash withdrawals that would support a drug purchase. And witnesses from Marcus's social circle say he did not use drugs. Tommy shifted in his seat. Maybe I was wrong about what he wanted. Maybe you were lying, Kowalski said. Detective, the lawyer warned. Linden placed another photograph on the table. This one showed Tommy on security camera footage near Harbinger Station, dated 3 weeks before Marcus's death. He was carrying what looked like tools in a canvas bag. Help us understand, Linden said, her voice softer now. Because right now, it looks like you were involved in whatever got Marcus killed, but I do not think you hurt him. I think you were hired to help with something, and then it went wrong. Tommy looked at his lawyer again. She nodded slightly. I need protection, he said. From who? I do not know who, that is the problem. Tommy rubbed his face with both hands. Okay, yeah, Marcus hired me. Said he found something in Harbinger station, needed help getting it out. Offered me $200. I figured, what is the harm? Building is getting torn down anyway. So I let him in a few times, helped him open up the wall, extract that case. We were careful, did it over several nights so nobody would notice. When was this? Started maybe a month ago, finished about 3 weeks back. He got the case out, took it with him. I figured that was the end of it. But it was not, Linden said. No, about a week later, this guy approaches me. I am at a bar after shift, and he just sits down next to me, does not introduce himself, says he knows I helped Marcus, says I should forget about it. I tell him I do not know what he is talking about. He slides an envelope across the bar, $5,000 in cash. What did he want? He said if anyone asked, I should say Marcus was into drugs, make him sound unstable, unreliable. Said it was important people think Marcus was not credible. I asked why. He said it was none of my business, but the money said otherwise. What did this man look like? 40-ish maybe, average height, brown hair, glasses, wore a nice coat, expensive shoes, talked like someone educated, not street, professional. Would you recognize him again? Maybe it was dim in the bar. Kowalski pulled out his phone, showed Tommy several photographs. Pictures of Graham Kellerman, of the lawyers from Kellerman's firm, of various men associated with the development projects. Tommy studied each one, shook his head. Not him either. Wait, he stopped at one image. Maybe, I am not sure, the lighting was bad. The photograph showed a man named Peter Stratton. He worked for Elena Vasquez's architectural firm. Tell me about the night Marcus died, Linden said. I was not there, I swear. I was at the docks doing actual work. My supervisor can confirm it. But someone contacted you that night. Tommy hesitated. I got a text from a number I did not recognize. It just said, the station tonight, make yourself scarce. I figured it meant stay away, so I did. Do you still have that text? I deleted it. I got scared, deleted everything. We can recover deleted texts, Kowalski said. Then do it. I am telling you the truth now. They verified Tommy's alibi for the night of the murder. His supervisor confirmed Tommy had been at the docks, visible on security cameras for the entire shift. The timeline made it physically impossible for him to have been at Harbinger Station when Marcus died. But the text message was real. Forensics recovered it from his phone. The number belonged to a burner purchased at a convenience store 2 weeks before Marcus's death. The store's security footage showed a man in a hood and sunglasses making a purchase. No useful identification. Someone set this up carefully, Kowalski said as they reviewed the evidence in their office. They knew Marcus found something. They knew Tommy helped him. They cultivated Tommy as a potential scapegoat. But when Tommy did not follow the script perfectly, they moved on, Linden said. The question is who? Who had the most to lose if Marcus went public with what he found? She pulled up the list of names from Carrick's ledgers. Gerald Kellerman was there, but so were others. The Horvath family, owners of a major shipping company. The Delacroix family, old money involved in warehousing. The Brennan family, who had transitioned from transportation to real estate development. All of them still active in Duluth business, all of them with reputations to protect. We need to figure out who knew what Marcus had, Linden said. He found the case 3 weeks before he died. What did he do with that information? They returned to Marcus's apartment, this time with a digital forensics specialist. The specialist recovered data from Marcus's laptop, including deleted files and browser history. Marcus had been meticulous. He had photographed every page of the ledgers. He had created a database of the names and transactions. He had cross-referenced them with current business registries, identifying which families were still prominent. And he had begun reaching out. Email drafts, the specialist said, pulling up a folder. He never sent them, but he wrote to about a dozen people. Historical societies, investigative journalists, the state attorney general's office. Linden read through the drafts. Marcus had been careful in his wording, offering to share historical documents related to the 1947 fraud case. He mentioned having primary source materials that had been missing for decades. He suggested the information would be of significant public interest. He was not trying to blackmail anyone, Linden said. He wanted the truth out there. But someone thought he was blackmailing them, Kowalski said, or someone was worried about what the truth would do. One draft email stood out. It was addressed to Graham Kellerman, dated 2 weeks before Marcus's death. Dear Mr. Kellerman, I am writing regarding information I have discovered about your family's involvement in the 1947 freight fraud case at Harbinger Station. I believe this information is historically significant and should be part of the public record. I would like to discuss this with you before I share it more widely. I am not interested in causing harm to you or your family, but I believe truth and historical accuracy are important. Please contact me at your convenience. Respectfully, Marcus Trent. Did he send it? Linden asked. The specialist checked. Yes, sent from his email account 12 days before his death. Did Kellerman respond? Not by email, but there is a record of a phone call. Kellerman's office number called Marcus's cell 3 days after the email. Call lasted 6 minutes. Linden and Kowalski looked at each other. Kellerman lied, Kowalski said. He told us he had no direct contact with Marcus besides the trespassing warnings. They brought Graham Kellerman in for a follow-up interview. This time, he arrived with 2 attorneys, both of whom looked like they charged $1,000 an hour. My client is here voluntarily, the lead attorney said. He wants to cooperate fully with your investigation. Kellerman sat with his hands folded on the table, his expression carefully neutral. He wore a different suit than before, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. You told us you had no recent contact with Marcus Trent besides issuing trespassing warnings through your property management company, Linden said. That is correct. But you received an email from him 2 weeks before his death. Kellerman's expression did not change, but one of his lawyers leaned forward. What email? Linden placed a printout on the table. This one, sent from Marcus Trent's email address to your business email. He asked to discuss information he had discovered about your family's involvement in the 1947 fraud case. I do not recall receiving that, Kellerman said. Your office phone called his cell 3 days after the email was sent. The call lasted 6 minutes. What did you discuss? Kellerman looked at his lawyers. The lead attorney said, my client receives hundreds of emails per day. His staff handles most of them. If a call was made from his office line, it could have been his assistant following up on routine matters. This was not routine, Linden said. Marcus Trent had discovered historical documents that directly implicated your grandfather in criminal activity. My grandfather has been dead for 40 years, Kellerman said, his voice tight. Whatever he may or may not have done is ancient history. But it is history that could affect your current business interests, Kowalski said. You are trying to develop multiple waterfront properties, Public exposure of your family's criminal past might affect those projects. That is absurd. Is it? You pushed hard to fast-track the demolition of Harbinger Station. Why the rush? Because the building is a liability. It is dangerous. It should have been torn down years ago. Or because you knew Marcus Trent had found something inside it, something you wanted destroyed. Kellerman stood up abruptly. I did not kill Marcus Trent. I had no reason to. My family's history, whatever it was, has no bearing on my current business. This is a fishing expedition. Sit down, Mr. Kellerman, Linden said quietly. He sat, but his jaw was clenched. Tell me about the phone call, Linden said. I told you I do not remember it. Then let me help. Marcus Trent emailed you about documents he had found. Your office called him. What did you say? One of the lawyers intervened. Detective, unless you have evidence my client was involved in this crime, this interview is over. We are establishing motive and opportunity, Linden said. You are harassing a respected businessman based on his grandfather's alleged misdeeds from 70 years ago. If you have evidence, present it. If not, we are leaving. Kellerman and his lawyers stood. Before they reached the door, Linden said, Where were you the night Marcus died? I already told you, at a charity dinner with 50 witnesses. And before the dinner, at my office preparing for the event. Anyone with you? My assistant was there until 5. I left for the dinner at 6:30. So between 5 and 6:30, you were alone. In my office, yes, but I did not leave. Security footage will confirm it. We will check that, Kowalski said. After they left, Linden sat in silence for several minutes. He is hiding something, she finally said. Yeah, but is he hiding murder or just embarrassment? I do not know yet. They requested security footage from Kellerman's office building. It showed him entering at 7 a.m. the day of Marcus's death, moving between his office and the building's conference rooms throughout the day. His assistant left at 5 p.m., as Kellerman had said. The footage showed Kellerman alone in his office until 6:25 p.m., when he left the building and drove away in his car. The charity dinner started at 7 p.m. at a hotel downtown. Multiple witnesses confirmed Kellerman's presence from 7:15 p.m. onward. Marcus's estimated time of death was between 8 p.m. and midnight. He could not have done it himself, Kowalski said. But he could have hired someone, Linden replied. They began tracing Kellerman's financial records, looking for unusual payments. His accounts showed typical business expenses, payroll, vendor payments, nothing suspicious. But then the forensic accountant found something. A wire transfer from one of Kellerman's corporate accounts to a shell company registered in Delaware. The amount was $50,000. The transfer occurred 3 days before Marcus's death. This company, the accountant said, pulling up registration documents, exists only on paper. Registered agent is a law firm that specializes in creating anonymous corporate structures. No physical address, no website, no public footprint. Can we trace where the money went after that? Linden asked. Working on it, but these shells are designed to obscure the trail. It might take time. While they pursued the financial angle, Linden decided to talk to Elena Vasquez again. Something about Elena's first interview had bothered her. The woman had been too careful, too rehearsed. Elena agreed to meet at her office. The architectural firm occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse overlooking the harbor. Modern furniture, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the frozen lake. Elena looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back hastily, minimal makeup. "Thank you for seeing me," Linden said. "I want to help. Marcus did not deserve what happened to him." They sat in a glass-walled conference room. Elena poured them both coffee from a thermal carafe. "Tell me about the last time you saw Marcus," Linden said. "I told you months ago. We ran into each other at a coffee shop. It was brief, cordial. But he contacted you more recently than that." Elena's hand paused with the coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "His phone records show several calls to your cell in the weeks before his death." "He might have called. I did not always answer." "But sometimes you did. One call 3 weeks before his death lasted 19 minutes. Elena set down her cup. She looked out the window at the gray water beyond. "He wanted to tell me about something he had found, historical documents related to Harbinger Station. He thought they were important." "What did he say about them?" "That they proved the building should be preserved, that there was significant historical value beyond just the architecture." He was excited, almost manic about it. I tried to be supportive, but honestly I thought he was obsessing again. He had a tendency to fixate. "Did he tell you specifically what was in the documents?" "Something about fraud, about his grandfather's involvement in illegal activity. He said it would force a historical preservation review, that the demolition would have to be stopped." "What did you tell him?" Elena's voice dropped. "I told him to be careful, that accusing prominent families of historical crimes could have consequences, that he should think about what he was really trying to accomplish." "Did he listen?" "No, he said truth was more important than protecting people's reputations. He said history mattered." "And you disagree?" "I did not disagree with the principle, but I know how this city works. The Kellermans, the Horvaths, the Brennans, they have deep roots here. They do not take challenges lightly." "Is that why you did not tell me about this before?" Linden asked. "Because you were afraid?" Elena met her eyes. "Yes, I was afraid. I still am." "Of what specifically?" "Of being dragged into something I have no control over. My firm does work for Kellerman's company. If it came out that I knew about Marcus's discovery and did not report it, I could lose my job. I could be blacklisted from every development project in the region." "So you prioritized your career over helping a murder investigation?" "That is not fair." "Is it not?" They sat in tense silence for a moment. "Did Marcus show you the actual documents?" Linden asked. "No, he just described what they contained." "Did you tell anyone about your conversation with him?" Elena hesitated too long before answering. "No." "You are lying." "I am not." "Elena, a man is dead. If you have information that could help us find who killed him, withholding it makes you an accessory. Do you understand that?" Elena's composure finally cracked, her eyes filled with tears. "I mentioned it to someone at work, just casually. I did not think it mattered." "Who?" "Peter Stratton. He is another architect at the firm. We were having lunch, and I mentioned Marcus had called, said he had found something that might affect the Harbinger demolition. Peter asked what, and I told him what Marcus said about the historical documents." "When was this?" 2.5 weeks before Marcus died." Linden felt something click into place. Did Peter seem interested? "He asked a few questions about what exactly was in the documents, whether Marcus had proof. I said I did not know details. That was the end of it." "Did Peter know Marcus?" "I do not think so. They moved in different circles." "Does Peter work on Kellerman's projects?" "He has. He was one of the team members on the Harbinger station assessment. Linden made notes. What can you tell me about Peter? He is ambitious, smart, good at his job. He has been with the firm for about 4 years. Personal life. Single, lives alone, keeps to himself mostly. He goes out drinking sometimes after work, but not with a regular group, more of a loner. Financial situation. Alina shrugged. As far as I know, he is fine. He does well here, makes good money. But Linden was already thinking about debts, about pressures, about desperate people making terrible choices. She stood. Thank you for your honesty, finally. I am sorry, Alina said. I should have told you this before. Yes, Linden said, you should have. The coordinates on the punched cards haunted Detective Sarah Linden through 3 sleepless nights. She spread them across her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, tracing patterns between the numbers, trying to find the logic Marcus Trent had seen. Each card bore the distinctive hole pattern of the railway inspector's punch tool, the brass instrument that had been clutched in the dead man's hand. The coordinates were precise, measured to the inch, but they meant nothing without context. Ray Kowalski found her still at the table when he arrived at 7 with coffee and bagels. He set the bag down and studied the cards without speaking. After a moment, he pulled out his phone and opened a mapping application. These are not street addresses, he said. The decimal precision is too specific. These are interior measurements, someone documenting locations inside a structure. Linden looked up at him, feeling the fog of exhaustion lift slightly. Harbinger Station, she said. Marcus was mapping specific points inside the building. We need to go back, Kowalski said, with a structural engineer and better equipment. If Marcus hid something there or found something there, these cards are the guide. The expedition was arranged for that evening after sunset when they could work without attracting attention. The demolition was now 9 days away, and Graham Kellerman's attorneys had made it clear that any further interference with his property would result in legal action. The warrant they obtained was narrow, specific to the murder investigation, time limited to 6 hours. The structural engineer was a woman named Diane Chen, 43, who had worked on historic preservation projects across the Midwest. She arrived with ground-penetrating radar equipment, moisture sensors, and a tablet loaded with the original 1920s blueprints of Harbinger Station. She studied the punched cards for 10 minutes before speaking. These coordinates assume you are standing at the main entrance, facing into the building, she said. They use the original survey markers as reference points. Whoever made these cards understood how the building was documented during construction. The station loomed against the winter sky as they approached, its silhouette broken and irregular. Floodlights had been set up by the police, powered by a portable generator that rumbled in the cold air. Inside, the temperature was barely above freezing. Their breath formed clouds as they moved through the main hall, following Chen's directions. The first coordinate led them to the northwest corner of the passenger waiting area, where wooden benches had rotted into the floor. Chen ran her sensors along the wall, watching the readings on her tablet. After several minutes, she tapped the screen and nodded. There is a cavity here, she said, behind the plaster about 8 inches deep. Not original construction. Someone created this space later. Kowalski photographed the wall from multiple angles while Linden marked the location with evidence tags. Chen used a small hammer and chisel to carefully remove a section of plaster, revealing a wooden panel behind it. The panel was newer than the surrounding structure, installed sometime in the decades after the building was abandoned. The panel came away with gentle pressure. Behind it was darkness and the smell of old paper. Linden aimed her flashlight into the cavity and saw a metal box, military surplus style, with a rubber seal around the lid. She pulled on latex gloves and lifted it out carefully. It was heavy, perhaps 20 pounds, and something shifted inside when she moved it. They set it on a tarp in the center of the waiting area. Kowalski and Chen stood back while Linden examined the exterior. There was no lock, just a simple latch that had corroded slightly but still functioned. She opened it slowly, conscious that whatever was inside had been hidden for decades, protected from moisture and decay. The contents were wrapped in oilcloth, layer after layer, creating a package that filled most of the box. Linden unwrapped it methodically, documenting each layer with photographs. When she reached the innermost wrapping, she found ledgers, 3 of them bound in leather that had survived remarkably well. Beneath the ledgers were smaller items, 2 railway inspector punch tools, both brass, both engraved with dates and initials. One of the punch tools was marked HS 1947 and matched the tool found with Marcus Trent's body. The other was marked DY 1947, presumably belonging to a different inspector at a different station. Both were in pristine condition, carefully maintained before being hidden. Linden opened the first ledger. The handwriting was meticulous, entries dated from January 1946 through November 1947. Each entry documented cargo shipments, inspection results, and certification numbers, but in the margins, in smaller script, were additional notes. These notes listed discrepancies, falsified weights, misreported contents, and the names of individuals who had authorized the fraudulent certifications. "This is a whistleblower's insurance policy," Chen said quietly, reading over Linden's shoulder. Whoever hid this was building a case, documenting everything, keeping proof safe. Kowalski was already on his phone, calling Dr. Patricia Horn. The historian arrived within 30 minutes, moving through the cold station with surprising speed for her age. When she saw the ledgers, she sat down on one of the broken benches and began to cry. "James Carrick," she said after she composed herself. "He was going to testify. He disappeared in December 1947, 2 weeks before the trial was supposed to begin. Everyone assumed the organized crime figures killed him, but he must have known they were coming. He hid the evidence first, made sure the truth would survive even if he did not." Linden turned pages carefully, aware that she was handling a document that had altered the course of several lives and now, 70 years later, might explain a new death. The names in the margins were prominent, respected. Several belonged to families that still had influence in Duluth. And one name appeared more frequently than others. Gerald Kellerman, dock supervisor, authorized irregular shipments on 14 separate occasions, received payments totaling $6,000 over an 18-month period. Dr. Horn photographed every page with her phone, her hands shaking slightly. Gerald Kellerman was Graham's grandfather, she said. The family fortune started with shipping contracts. If this had come out during the trial, the Kellermans would have been ruined. They would have lost everything. "Marcus Trent found this," Linden said. "He found Carrick's evidence, probably using these coordinates somehow. The question is what he planned to do with it and who knew he had found it." They transported the box and its contents to the police evidence facility under heavy security. The ledgers were logged, photographed in high resolution, and locked in the climate-controlled vault. By midnight, Linden had copies of every page spread across the conference room table. Kowalski brought in 2 other detectives to help cross-reference the names with current city records, property holdings, and business registrations. The connections emerged slowly, built on decades of careful investment and strategic marriages. The Kellerman family had used their shipping profits to acquire real estate, diversify into construction, and establish political relationships that spanned generations. Graham Kellerman was not merely a property developer. He was the public face of a network of interests that included waterfront redevelopment, municipal contracts, and infrastructure projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And Marcus Trent, with his obsessive documentation and his sense of historical justice, had threatened to expose the foundation on which that empire was built. Linden called Alina Vasquez at 7 in the morning. The architect answered on the first ring, her voice already tense. "Detective, have you found something?" "I need you to come to the station," Linden said. "Now, and I need you to bring any communication you had with Marcus in the weeks before his death. All of it, texts, emails, voicemails, everything." Alina arrived within an hour, carrying her laptop and phone. She looked as though she had not slept well in days. Linden led her to an interview room and closed the door. Kowalski started the recording equipment. "Tell me again about the last time Marcus contacted you," Linden said. Alina took a breath. 3 weeks before he died, he called me, said he had found something at Harbinger station, something that would stop the demolition. I told him I could not get involved, that it would create a conflict of interest with my firm. "What exactly did he say he found?" "He said it was proof that the building had historical significance beyond its architecture. He said there were documents, original documents from the 1940s that would trigger a mandatory preservation review." Linden opened her tablet and showed Alina photographs of the ledger pages. The architect's face went pale. She stared at the screen for a long moment before speaking. "He sent these to me," she said quietly. "Not the originals, photocopies, a week before he died. They came in an unmarked envelope delivered to my apartment. No note, no explanation, just these pages, maybe 15 or 20 of them, showing the fraud, showing Gerald Kellerman's involvement." "And what did you do with them?" Kowalski asked. Alina closed her eyes. "I burned them. I burned them in my kitchen sink, and I told no one. I convinced myself it was old history, that it did not matter anymore, that Marcus was just trying to manipulate me into helping him. But really I was afraid of what would happen if I brought them forward, afraid of losing my job, my reputation, afraid of Graham Kellerman." "Did you tell Marcus you received them?" Linden asked. I told him what he was doing was dangerous and stupid. I told him to let it go, to stop dragging the past into the present. He said I was choosing my career over the truth. He said I was just like everyone else who let powerful people bury their crimes, and then he hung up on me. That was the last time we spoke. Linden leaned forward. "Did you tell anyone else about the documents? Anyone at your firm? Anyone connected to the Kellerman projects?" Lena shook her head slowly, then she stopped. "Wait, Peter Stratton, he knew Marcus had contacted me. We were having lunch maybe 2 weeks before Marcus died, and I got another call from Marcus that I did not answer. Peter asked who kept calling me, and I was frustrated, so I told him. I told him my ex had found some old documents and was trying to get me involved in stopping a demolition. I did not give him details, but I mentioned it was the Harbinger Station project." Kowalski and Linden exchanged looks. Peter Stratton, the junior architect at Alina's firm, 29 years old, ambitious, nervous during his initial interview. The man who had conducted the structural assessment of Harbinger Station 2 months before Marcus's death. "Peter seemed interested," Linden asked. "More than interested, he asked a lot of questions. What kind of documents? Where did Marcus find them? Had Marcus shown them to anyone official? I told him I did not know the details, that Marcus and I were not on good terms. Peter dropped it after that, but he seemed tense about it." They let Alina go after taking her full statement. Linden pulled Peter Stratton's file and began reviewing everything they had collected. The phone records showed 3 calls between Stratton and Marcus in the week before the murder, each lasting less than 2 minutes. Stratton's initial interview claimed he had spoken to Marcus once, briefly, about the building assessment report. He had lied about the number of contacts. The structural assessment itself was revealing under closer scrutiny. Linden and Kowalski brought in an independent engineer to review the report Stratton had filed with the city. The independent engineer identified multiple omissions. Features that should have triggered historical review had been glossed over or mischaracterized. The interior survey had been incomplete. focusing only on structural stability rather than comprehensive documentation. It was as if the assessment had been designed to expedite demolition rather than provide an accurate evaluation. "This is not incompetence," the independent engineer told them. "This is deliberate. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what to leave out." Linden obtained a warrant for Stratton's work computer and email account. The IT forensics team found deleted messages that had been only partially overwritten. Fragments of correspondence emerged, pieced together from Slack space and backup files. An email sent 2 weeks before Marcus's death. "Problem at the station needs resolution before documents surface." A reply, "How much time do we have?" Another message. Subject becoming insistent, may go public regardless of consequences. The messages were sent from Stratton's work email to an encrypted account that routed through multiple servers. The forensics team traced it as far as they could, hitting dead ends at offshore domains and cryptocurrency payment nodes, but the context was clear. Stratton had been communicating with someone about Marcus, about the documents, about the need to prevent the discovery from becoming public. Kowalski pulled financial records for Stratton, requesting everything from the past 2 years. What they found painted a picture of escalating desperation. Stratton had gambling debts, substantial ones, with unlicensed bookmakers who operated through cash-only transactions and intermediaries. The debts had reached $70,000 by the fall of 2018. Then, 2 weeks before Marcus Trent's death, the debts disappeared. Paid in full, according to a source Kowalski cultivated in the gambling network. Paid by someone with significant resources. "He was bought," Kowalski said, staring at the timeline they had constructed on the whiteboard. "Someone found out about his debts, paid them off, and put him to work." "But doing what?" Linden asked. Stratton could not have known about the documents unless Marcus told him, and Marcus would not have confided in someone from the firm trying to demolish the building. They went back to the phone records, examining every call and text message in Marcus's final weeks. Most were routine, calls to other urban explorers, texts to photography equipment suppliers, messages to Dr. Horn about historical research. But there was one anomaly. 3 days before his death, Marcus had called a number that was not in his contacts list. The call lasted 11 minutes. The number belonged to a prepaid phone, activated 2 weeks earlier, used only for that one call and never used again. The phone had been purchased at a convenience store in West Duluth. Security footage showed a man in his late 20s, wearing a hood, paying cash. The angle was wrong to see his face, but his build and height matched Peter Stratton's general description. Linden and Kowalski brought Stratton in for formal questioning at noon the next day. He arrived with an attorney, a sharply dressed woman from a firm that specialized in white-collar defense. The attorney made it clear that her client would cooperate fully, but would not tolerate harassment or unfounded accusations. Stratton looked terrible. He had lost weight since his first interview, and his hands trembled when he set them on the table. Linden started with simple questions, establishing timeline, reviewing his previous statements. Then she shifted. "Tell me about the prepaid phone you bought on January 4th, she said. Stratton blinked. "I did not buy a prepaid phone." "We have security footage from a convenience store showing someone matching your description, purchasing a prepaid phone with cash on that date. The phone was used once to call Marcus Trent 3 days before his death." The attorney leaned over and whispered in Stratton's ear. He shook his head slightly. "That was not me. I have never bought a prepaid phone." Kowalski slid a folder across the table. "These are records of your communications with Marcus Trent. You told us you spoke once. The records show 3 calls. You lied in your initial interview. Why?" Stratton's face flushed. "I forgot it was brief, not important." 11 minutes is not brief," Linden said. What did you and Marcus discuss for 11 minutes, 3 days before someone killed him? The attorney held up her hand. My client will not answer speculative questions designed to imply guilt. If you have evidence connecting Mr. Stratton to a crime, present it. Otherwise, we are leaving. Linden opened another folder, this one containing the email fragments recovered from Stratton's work computer. She read them aloud, slowly, watching Stratton's expression change from defensive to panic. When she finished, she set the pages in front of him. "Who were you communicating with?" she asked. "Who needed the problem at Harbinger Station resolved?" Stratton stared at the pages. His breathing had become shallow. The attorney whispered urgently in his ear again, but he did not respond. After a long silence, he looked up at Linden. "I want to make a deal," he said. "I will tell you everything, but I want immunity." The attorney tried to object, but Stratton cut her off. "They are going to kill me if I do not cooperate with the police. You do not understand who these people are." The negotiation took 3 hours. The district attorney was brought in, terms were discussed, agreements drafted. In the end, Stratton was offered reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. He would plead guilty to obstruction of justice and conspiracy, facing 5 to 10 years instead of life for murder if his information led to arrests of others involved. When the paperwork was signed, Stratton began to talk. He told them about the gambling debts, about the men who had threatened him, about the offer that had come through an intermediary he knew only as Mr. Gray. The offer was simple: provide information about Marcus Trent's activities at Harbinger Station, discourage him from pursuing his historical discovery, and ensure the demolition schedule stayed on track. In exchange, Stratton's debts would be cleared, and he would receive $50,000 in cryptocurrency. "I thought it was just about scaring him off," Stratton said, his voice shaking. "I thought they wanted me to talk to him, convince him to drop it. I did not know they were going to kill him. I swear I did not know." "But you did talk to him," Linden said. "That 11-minute phone call. What did you say?" Stratton closed his eyes. "I told him I knew about the documents. I told him there were people who would pay substantial amounts to acquire them privately, people who wanted to avoid public scandal. I said if he was willing to sell, I could broker a deal. He called me a coward and a traitor and hung up." "And then what happened?" "I reported back to Mr. Gray. I said Marcus would not cooperate, that he was determined to go public. Mr. Gray told me to set up a meeting, to tell Marcus I had changed my mind, that I wanted to help him authenticate the documents and bring them to the right authorities. I was supposed to meet him at Harbinger Station and stall him there while they sent someone to, I do not know, talk to him more seriously." "You lured him to the place where he was killed," Kowalski said. "I lured him there for a meeting. I did not know anyone was going to hurt him. They told me it would just be a conversation." Linden felt cold spreading through her chest. "Were you there when Marcus was killed?" Stratton shook his head violently. "No, I set up the meeting for 8 at night. I was supposed to show up at 8:30, but I got scared. I sat in my car 2 blocks away and I could not do it. I just sat there paralyzed. Around 9, I got a text from a number I did not recognize. It said, 'Problem resolved, clean your phone.' I drove home and tried to forget it happened." "Who killed Marcus Trent?" Linden asked. "I do not know. I never met anyone except Mr. Gray, and even that was only twice in parking garages at night. He always wore a hood and sunglasses. I could not identify him if I tried." The attorney interjected. "My client has provided everything he knows. He has cooperated fully. The agreement was for information leading to arrests, but if he genuinely does not know the identity of the killer, he cannot be held responsible for that gap." Kowalski stood abruptly and left the room. Linden could hear him in the hallway, swearing. She kept her face neutral, but inside she felt the case threatening to slip away. Stratton had given them conspiracy, motive, and timeline, but the person who actually killed Marcus Trent remained a shadow. They kept Stratton in protective custody while the investigation expanded. Financial analysts traced the cryptocurrency payments backward through exchanges and tumblers, hitting walls at every turn. The digital currency had been purchased through peer-to-peer networks, laundered through gambling sites and shell companies, dispersed across multiple wallets before landing in Stratton's account. Whoever had arranged it understood how to hide money. Dr. Horn called Linden that evening, her voice urgent. I have been researching the families named in the ledgers. Gerald Kellerman was not the only one implicated. There were 6 others, all from prominent Duluth families. 2 of those families have descendants who are currently involved in waterfront redevelopment projects. One of them is on the board of the investment group funding Graham Kellerman's demolitions. Names, Linden said, pulling out her notebook. Richard Voss, age 61, board member of Lakeshore Investments. His grandfather was Albert Voss, cargo supervisor at the docks, took $15,000 in bribes according to the ledgers. And Catherine Moreland, age 57, also on the board of Lakeshore Investments. Her grandfather was Douglas Moreland, railway clerk, falsified hundreds of inspection reports. Linden felt the pieces shifting. Lakeshore Investments had financial stakes in 11 properties along the waterfront, all scheduled for demolition and redevelopment over the next 3 years. Harbinger Station was the first. If Marcus's discovery had triggered a historical preservation review, it would have set a precedent. Other buildings would have been scrutinized. Projects would have been delayed or canceled. Hundreds of millions of dollars were at risk. How many people on the board of Lakeshore Investments have ancestors named in those ledgers? Linden asked. Dr. Horn's voice was grim. 4 out of 7. This was not just about protecting Graham Kellerman's family reputation. This was about protecting an entire network of families whose wealth was built on corruption their grandparents committed 70 years ago. Kowalski obtained warrants for Lakeshore Investments' financial records, communications, and employee files. The company fought back immediately, filing motions to quash the warrants, arguing lack of probable cause and overreach. The legal battle consumed 2 days while the clock ticked down toward demolition. On the 8th day, Linden received an anonymous call on her cell phone. The voice was distorted, run through a digital filter. Detective Linden, you are pursuing a case that will destroy innocent people and accomplish nothing. Marcus Trent was a troubled man with a vendetta against progress. His death was tragic but unrelated to the documents he found. Peter Stratton acted alone, motivated by debts and desperation. Accept that and move on. Who is this? Linden demanded. Someone trying to save you from wasting your career on a conspiracy that does not exist. Drop the investigation into Lakeshore Investments. Focus on Stratton. He is guilty. Make your case against him and close the file. The call ended. Linden immediately contacted the phone company to trace the number, but it was another prepaid phone, this one never used before or after that single call. The message was clear. They were being watched, and they were getting too close to something important. That night, as Linden drove home from the station, her brakes failed. She was traveling 35 miles per hour through a residential neighborhood when she pressed the pedal and felt it go to the floor. Her car coasted through a stop sign and into an intersection. Only luck and the emptiness of the street at 11 at night prevented a collision. She managed to engage the emergency brake and bring the vehicle to a shuddering stop against a curb. The mechanic who examined the car the next morning found the brake line had been cut cleanly with a sharp tool. The cut was positioned to ensure gradual fluid loss, not immediate failure. It was designed to create an accident that would look like mechanical failure or driver error, not sabotage. Kowalski exploded when he heard. He insisted on a protective detail, 24-hour surveillance, safe houses. Linden refused the safe house but accepted the surveillance. She also made 3 copies of every file related to the case and stored them in separate secure locations. If someone wanted to stop the investigation, they would have to do more than threaten one detective. The media caught the story the next day. Not the brake tampering, which Linden and Kowalski kept quiet, but the connection between Graham Kellerman's grandfather and the historical railway fraud. A local investigative journalist named Michelle Torres had been cultivating sources within the police department. She published a long article detailing the 1947 scandal, the ledgers found at Harbinger Station, and the implications for the Kellerman family's reputation. The response was immediate and divided. Preservation advocates rallied, demanding the city halt the demolition and conduct a thorough historical review. Development interests pushed back, arguing that 70-year-old crimes were irrelevant to modern projects. Graham Kellerman held a press conference, his attorneys flanking him, and issued a careful statement. He acknowledged his grandfather's involvement in the fraud, expressed regret for actions taken by previous generations, but insisted that he personally had no knowledge of Marcus Trent's discovery and no involvement in his death. "The past is the past," Kellerman said, looking directly into the cameras. "We cannot change what our ancestors did. We can only move forward and build a better future. Harbinger Station is a dangerous, crumbling ruin. Preserving it serves no purpose except to satisfy the nostalgia of a small group of activists. This city needs jobs, economic development, and modern infrastructure. That is what I am working to provide." The city council scheduled an emergency session to vote on halting the demolition. The session was set for the following evening, less than 48 hours before the scheduled demolition date. Public comment was open, and within hours, more than 200 people had signed up to speak. Linden and Kowalski worked through the night, building the case against Peter Stratton and trying to identify the intermediary known as Mr. Gray. Surveillance footage from the parking garages where Stratton claimed to have met him yielded nothing useful. The angles were wrong, the lighting poor, the figure always obscured. They brought in specialists to enhance the images, but the results were inconclusive. Mr. Gray remained a ghost. On the morning before the city council session, a break came from an unexpected source. Tommy Oakes, the dock worker who had initially lied about his interactions with Marcus, called Linden directly. His voice was panicked. "Someone approached me," Tommy said, "last night outside my apartment. A man, maybe 50, wearing an expensive coat. He offered me $10,000 to change my story, to say that I saw Peter Stratton meeting with Marcus the night he died, to say I heard them arguing. He wants me to testify that Stratton threatened Marcus." "Did you agree?" Linden asked. "I told him I would think about it. He gave me a number to call. Detective, I am scared. I already lied once and almost got charged. Now they want me to lie again, and I do not know what happens if I refuse." "Where are you right now?" "In my car in a grocery store parking lot. I did not want to call from my apartment." Linden sent 2 patrol cars to pick up Tommy and bring him to the station under protection. When he arrived, he gave them the phone number he had been told to call. It was another prepaid phone, but this time they moved faster. They set up a sting, with Tommy making the call while police traced the signal and positioned units nearby. Tommy called the number and said he agreed to testify as instructed. The voice on the other end told him to meet at a specific location in 1 hour. Police surrounded the location, a vacant lot near the industrial district. They waited in unmarked vehicles, watching. The man who arrived was not Mr. Gray. He was younger, maybe 35, wearing business casual clothes and driving a leased sedan. He walked into the lot and looked around, clearly expecting to meet someone. When Tommy did not appear, he waited for 10 minutes, then walked back to his car. Police moved in before he could drive away. His name was Daniel Ortiz, and he worked as a paralegal for a law firm that represented Lakeshore Investments. In his car, police found a folder containing typed instructions for Tommy's testimony, $20,000 in cash, and a prepaid phone with text messages from yet another encrypted account. The messages instructed Ortiz to secure Tommy's cooperation by any means necessary and to ensure Peter Stratton took full blame for Marcus Trent's death. Ortiz was not a hardened criminal. Under interrogation, he broke within 2 hours. He admitted to being hired by an attorney at his firm, a senior partner named Harold Grimes. Grimes had told him the perjured testimony was necessary to protect the firm's clients from a baseless conspiracy theory. Ortiz believed he was doing legitimate work until he saw the cash and realized what he was actually being asked to do. With Ortiz's testimony, they obtained a warrant for Harold Grimes's communications and financial records. Grimes was 63, a founding partner of his firm, with a client list that included most of the major development companies in Duluth. His personal finances were complex, rooted through trusts and offshore accounts, but the forensic accountants found irregularities, large payments from shell companies controlled by Lakeshore Investments. Unusual bonuses tied to specific dates, including one substantial payment made 3 days after Marcus Trent's death. Grimes was arrested at his office the morning of the city council session. He refused to speak without his own attorney, a specialist in criminal defense flown in from Chicago. The arrest made headlines immediately. Michelle Torres published a follow-up article connecting Grimes to Lakeshore Investments, the historical fraud, and the attempt to frame Peter Stratton completely. The city council session that evening was chaotic. Protesters filled the chambers, split between those demanding preservation and those supporting development. Graham Kellerman sat in the front row, his face impassive. Dr. Patricia Horn spoke passionately about the historical significance of Harbinger Station and the need to honor the truth James Carrick had died trying to protect. Elena Vasquez spoke briefly, her voice shaking, admitting her own failure to support Marcus when he needed it. The council voted 5-4 to delay the demolition for 90 days pending a comprehensive historical review. Kellerman walked out without comment. Outside, news crews swarmed and the preservation advocates celebrated. Linden watched from the back of the chambers, exhausted, knowing the victory was incomplete. They had stopped the demolition, arrested 2 conspirators, but the person who actually killed Marcus Trent was still unidentified. That night, Kowalski found her in the conference room, staring at the whiteboard covered with names, dates, and connections drawn in different colored markers. He set a cup of coffee in front of her and sat down. "We are close," he said. "Grimes will break eventually. He is a lawyer. He understands how leverage works. When he realizes Lakeshore is going to abandon him, he will trade information for a deal." Stratton lured Marcus to his death, Linden said. Grimes coordinated the conspiracy, but someone went to Harbinger Station and swung the weapon that killed him. Someone with a direct stake in keeping those documents hidden. Someone willing to commit murder personally, not just hire it out. Kowalski nodded slowly. "We need to re-examine the crime scene evidence. Go back to the forensics, the blood spatter, the physical details. The answer is there. We just have not seen it yet." They returned to the forensic reports, reading them again with fresh attention. The blood spatter analyst had determined the attack came from behind, slightly to the left, delivered by someone approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. The weapon was a timber beam heavy, requiring substantial strength to swing with fatal force. The victim had been struck once precisely at the base of the skull, suggesting someone who knew what they were doing. Marcus had been 6 feet 2 inches tall. He was fit, strong, experienced in navigating dangerous abandoned structures. For someone to get close enough to strike him from behind, he must have trusted them, or at least not perceived them as a threat. He would have been focused on something else, distracted, vulnerable. The punch tool clutched in his hand suggested he was examining the documents when he was attacked. The ledgers, perhaps, or the other punch tools. He was authenticating his discovery, verifying it was real, making sure he had the proof he needed. And someone had walked up behind him, picked up a beam, and ended his life with a single blow. Linden thought about the list of suspects. Peter Stratton was 5 feet 7 inches, but he claimed he never entered the building. Elena Vasquez was 5 feet 9 inches. Graham Kellerman was 6 feet tall. The height did not match. Unless there was someone they had not yet considered, someone connected to the case but not yet identified as a suspect, someone with access, motive, and the physical profile to match the forensics. She pulled the file on the structural assessment team that had visited Harbinger Station 2 months before Marcus's death. Elena Vasquez and Peter Stratton had been listed as the primary inspectors, but there was a third name on the sign-in sheet, assistant engineer, present for safety compliance, name printed in small letters at the bottom. Sarah Chen, age 32, height listed on her driver's license, 5 feet 7 inches. Linden looked up at Kowalski. We need to find Sarah Chen right now. Detective Sarah Linden sat in her car outside the Duluth Police Department, staring at the crime scene photographs spread across her passenger seat. The heater hummed against the January cold, but she barely noticed. 3 weeks into the Marcus Trent investigation, and the pieces were finally beginning to align in a way that made her stomach tight. She picked up the photo showing the chalk marks on the floor near where Marcus's body had been found. Faint, almost invisible in the initial sweep, but undeniably there. Survey notations, the kind used in structural assessments. Only professionals conducting building evaluations would use that specific notation system. Kowalski tapped on her window, making her jump. She unlocked the door and he slid into the passenger seat, brushing snow from his shoulders. "You are going to give yourself an ulcer," he said, looking at the photos. "It is 2 in the morning." "Look at these marks," Linden said, pointing. "I missed them the first time. We all did." Kowalski leaned closer, squinting. "Survey marks, so what? The building was being assessed for demolition." "Exactly," Linden said. Elena Vasquez's firm did the structural assessment 2 months before Marcus died. Who was on that assessment team? Kowalski pulled out his phone, scrolling through their case notes. Elena and a junior architect, Peter Stratton. We talked to him briefly, but he was not a primary focus. "He should have been," Linden said. "Marcus's phone records show 3 calls to Stratton a week before he died. Why would Marcus be calling the architect who assessed the building?" "Maybe Marcus thought the assessment was incomplete," Kowalski said slowly, "or deliberately mislighting." Linden started the car. "We need to look at that assessment report again, and we need to talk to Peter Stratton. Now." "Now, Sarah, it is the middle of the night." "Then we start with the paperwork," she said. "I am not waiting until morning." They drove back to the station in silence, the streets empty except for the occasional snowplow. Inside, Linden pulled up the digital copy of the structural assessment report filed by Elena's firm 2 months before Marcus's death. She read through it twice, then a third time, making notes. "Here," she said, pointing at the screen. "The report mentions stability issues, recommends demolition as most cost-effective solution. But look what it does not mention: historical architectural features, original fixtures, anything that might trigger a preservation review." Kowalski read over her shoulder. "Is that unusual?" Dr. Horn said Harbinger Station had significant historical elements. Original tile work, brass fixtures, structural details from the 1920s. None of that is in this assessment. It is like they deliberately left it out. "To streamline the demolition approval," Kowalski said. "If historical features were documented, the preservation board would have gotten involved. Months of delays." Linden pulled up Peter Stratton's background file. 31 years old, graduated from University of Minnesota Architecture program 6 years ago. Worked for 3 different firms before joining Elena's company 18 months ago. No criminal record, no obvious red flags. But his financial records told a different story. "Look at this," Linden said, highlighting a section. "Stratton has been making regular payments to an offshore account. Started about 8 months ago. $500 a month, every month, like clockwork. Loan repayment, Kowalski suggested. Maybe, but there is no corresponding loan origination in his credit history. She kept scrolling. And look at this. 2 weeks before Marcus died, someone paid off a $70,000 debt Stratton owed, just wiped it clean. 70,000, Kowalski repeated. What kind of debt? Linden pulled up additional financial records, cross-referencing accounts. No bank loans, no credit cards. This looks like it was to unlicensed creditors. Gambling debts, probably. So Stratton had serious money problems, Kowalski said, and someone paid them off right before Marcus died. Someone who wanted something in return, Linden said. She printed out the financial records and added them to the growing stack of evidence on her desk. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. She checked her watch, 5:30 in the morning. She called Stratton's number. It went to voicemail. Peter Stratton, this is Detective Linden with Duluth Police. I need you to come in for a follow-up interview regarding the Marcus Trent investigation. Please call me back as soon as possible. She hung up and looked at Kowalski. We need to talk to his roommate, the one who provided his alibi. The roommate, a graduate student named David Chen, was not happy about being woken up at 6 in the morning. He answered the door in sweatpants and a university hoodie, blinking sleep from his eyes. I already talked to you, he said. Peter was home the night that photographer died. We have some follow-up questions, Linden said. May we come in? Chen reluctantly stepped aside. The apartment was small but tidy, textbooks stacked on the coffee table, dishes drying in the kitchen rack. Linden noticed a second bedroom door closed. Is Peter here? She asked. He left for work already, Chen said. He goes in early on Thursdays. When you said Peter was home the night of January 10th, Linden said, you were certain about that. Yes, we watched a movie. I remember because it was a Wednesday and I had an exam the next day. I needed to de-stress. What time did the movie end? Around 10, maybe. Then we both went to our rooms. And Peter stayed in his room all night. Chen hesitated. I assume so. I went to sleep. You did not hear him leave. I am a heavy sleeper, Chen said, but his car was here in the morning, so he must have been home. Could he have left and come back without you hearing? Chen's expression shifted, doubt creeping in. I guess so, but why would he? That is what we are trying to determine, Linden said. Did Peter seem upset or agitated when he came home from work that day? Not really. He was quiet, but Peter is always kind of quiet. Did he receive any unusual calls or messages? I do not know. We do not really keep track of each other like that. Kowalski showed Chen a photo of Marcus. Did you ever see this man visit Peter or hear Peter mention him? Chen studied the photo. No, who is he? Marcus Trent, the victim. Chen's eyes widened. I thought you said Peter was not a suspect. We are just following up on some inconsistencies, Linden said. Did Peter leave the apartment at all during the evening of January 10th, even for a short time? Chen sat down on the couch, rubbing his face. I do not know, maybe. I took some cold medicine that night because I was getting sick. It made me drowsy. I might have fallen asleep before the movie ended, now that I think about it. So Peter could have left after you fell asleep. I guess, but I really do not remember. I just assumed he stayed in because his car was here. Does Peter have access to another vehicle? Kowalski asked. His girlfriend has a car. Sometimes he borrows it. Linden exchanged a glance with Kowalski. What is his girlfriend's name? Rachel something. They have been dating a few months. She does not come around much. They left the apartment with Chen looking worried and confused. Linden called the station and had an officer pull Peter Stratton's girlfriend's information. Rachel Morrison, 28, worked as a paralegal downtown. Her vehicle was registered, a blue Honda Civic. Check traffic cameras for that vehicle on January 10th, Linden told the officer. Between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. focus on routes between Stratton's apartment and the waterfront. While they waited for the results, Linden and Kowalski drove to Elena Vasquez's architectural firm. The office was modern, all glass and steel, overlooking Lake Superior. Elena met them in a conference room, her expression guarded. "More questions," she said. "We need to talk about Peter Stratton," Linden said. "He worked on the Harbinger station assessment with you. He did the preliminary measurements and structural calculations. I supervised and signed off on the final report. Did Peter ever express concerns about the completeness of the assessment?" Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" "Historical features, original architectural elements. The report does not mention any of them. Because they were not relevant to the structural assessment. Our job was to evaluate safety and demolition feasibility, not historical significance. But someone reviewing for preservation status would need that information," Linden said, "and it is usually included in comprehensive assessments." "Are you suggesting we deliberately omitted information?" Elena's voice hardened. "I am suggesting the report was incomplete," Linden said. "Whether that was intentional or not is what we are trying to determine. Did Marcus Trent ever contact Peter about the assessment?" Elena hesitated. "Not that I know of." Because Peter's phone records show 3 calls from Marcus the week before he died. Elena stood up, walking to the window. "I did not know that." "Did Peter ever mention Marcus, express concerns about him?" "No, Peter barely talked about anything. He kept to himself, did his work, left on time. He was competent but not particularly ambitious." "Did he have financial problems that you were aware of?" "I do not involve myself in employees' personal finances." "Did he seem stressed, distracted?" Elena turned back to them. "About 2 months ago he seemed off, made some calculation errors, missed a deadline. I talked to him about it and he apologized, said he was dealing with some personal issues. He improved after that." 2 months ago, Linden repeated, "right around the time someone paid off his gambling debts." Elena sat back down. "Peter gambled." $70,000 worth, Kowalski said, "to unlicensed bookmakers." Elena closed her eyes. "I had no idea." "Did anyone from outside the firm show unusual interest in the Harbinger station assessment?" Linden asked. "The client was interested, obviously. Graham Kellerman wanted it fast-tracked, but that is normal for development projects." "Anyone else, investors, other development companies?" "There was an investment group backing Kellerman's waterfront projects. They had representatives at a few meetings, asking about timelines and cost projections. But that is standard due diligence." "Do you remember the name of the investment group?" "Northern Lakes Development Partners. They have stakes in several waterfront properties." Linden wrote it down. "Did Peter interact with them?" "He was at one meeting taking notes, but he did not speak much." They left Elena's office and sat in the car while Kowalski called the station for information on Northern Lakes Development Partners. The investment group had significant holdings across Minnesota and Wisconsin, focusing on waterfront revitalization projects. Registered in Delaware, primary investors shielded behind layers of corporate structures. They have 6 properties in Duluth alone, Kowalski said, reading from his phone, all awaiting demolition for redevelopment, combined value of over $40 million. If Marcus's discovery triggered historical preservation reviews on those properties, Linden said, it could delay the entire development timeline, cost them millions. Her phone buzzed. The traffic camera results were in. A blue Honda Civic registered to Rachel Morrison had been captured on camera traveling toward the waterfront district at 10:15 p.m. on January 10th. The same vehicle was recorded returning at 1:23 a.m. Stratton lied, Kowalski said. He was not home all night. They pulled up Peter Stratton's current location using his phone's GPS data. He was at a construction site on the north side of town, conducting a site inspection. Linden called for backup and they drove there, arriving to find Stratton standing near an excavator, talking to a foreman. He saw them approaching and his face went pale. Peter Stratton, Linden said, we need you to come with us for questioning. About what? I already talked to you. About where you were on the night of January 10th, Kowalski said, and why you lied about it. Stratton looked around as if considering running, then seemed to deflate. I want a lawyer. That is your right, Linden said, but we are going to search your apartment and your vehicles, and we are going to find out exactly what you were doing at Harbinger Station that night. They brought Stratton to the station and read him his rights. He refused to say anything without an attorney present. While they waited for his lawyer to arrive, Linden obtained a search warrant for his apartment and Rachel Morrison's car. The search team found the evidence within 2 hours. In the attic crawlspace of Stratton's apartment, hidden inside an old gym bag, they discovered a jacket with bloodstains. The blood type matched Marcus Trent. Next to it was a pair of work boots with traces of brick dust and concrete particulate consistent with samples from Harbinger Station. One boot had a partial tread pattern that matched an unidentified print found near the crime scene. Stratton's laptop, seized from his bedroom, showed recently deleted emails. The forensic team recovered them within an hour. Messages between Stratton and an encrypted email address discussing the problem at the station and necessary measures to protect the timeline. The final message, sent the morning after Marcus died, read, "It is done. He will not be a problem anymore." Linden read the messages twice, her heart pounding. They had him, physical evidence, digital evidence, motive, and opportunity. But they still did not have the full picture of who else was involved. The blood spatter analyst's refined report arrived while they waited. The attack angle suggested the assailant was approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. Marcus Trent had been 6 feet 2 inches. Peter Stratton's driver's license listed him at 5 feet 7 inches. Well, everything fit. Stratton's lawyer arrived 3 hours later. Martin Voss, a criminal defense attorney from Minneapolis, expensive suit and cold eyes. He conferred with his client for 40 minutes before emerging. My client is willing to make a statement, Voss said, but only if you are prepared to discuss a plea arrangement. That depends on what he has to say, Linden replied. They reconvened in the interrogation room. Stratton looked smaller now, hunched in his chair, hands clasped on the table. Voss sat beside him, legal pad ready. Start from the beginning, Linden said. How did you first encounter Marcus Trent? Stratton spoke quietly, his voice flat. He called me about 6 weeks before he died. Said he had been researching Harbinger Station and noticed the assessment report I filed was incomplete. He wanted to know why. What did you tell him? I told him it was not my decision. The scope of the assessment was defined by the client. We evaluated structural integrity, not historical significance. But that was not the truth, Linden said. Stratton glanced at his lawyer, who nodded slightly. I was told to keep the historical elements out of the report. My supervisor said it would complicate the approval process. Elena told you this. No, someone higher up. I do not know who made the final call. What happened next with Marcus? He kept calling. He said he was going to file a complaint with the Historical Preservation Board, get the assessment reviewed independently. I tried to tell him it would not matter. The demolition was already approved, but he would not listen. When did you meet him at Harbinger Station? Stratton's hands trembled slightly. The night he died, he called me that afternoon and said he had found something inside the building. Historical documents that proved the station should be protected. He wanted me to verify the architectural details so his preservation claim would be stronger. Why did you agree to meet him? Stratton was silent for a long moment. I was scared. About a month before that, someone approached me about my gambling debts, said they could make them disappear if I helped with something. Who approached you? I do not know his real name. He said to call him Jack. We met in a parking ramp downtown. He knew everything. How much I owed, who I owed it to, what would happen if I did not pay. What did he want you to do? Keep Marcus Trent from going public with whatever he found. Jack said there were important projects depending on Harbinger Station being demolished on schedule. He said if Marcus succeeded in getting it declared historical, it would cost a lot of people a lot of money. How much did Jack pay you? He paid off my debts, $70,000, and he said there would be $50,000 more if I handled the Marcus problem. Handled it how? He said to discourage him, convince him to drop it, buy the documents if I could, whatever it took. Linden leaned forward. Did Jack tell you to kill Marcus? No, Stratton said quickly. He said to make the problem go away, but he did not say kill him. I thought I could just buy the documents, maybe scare him a little. But that is not what happened. Stratton put his head in his hands. I met Marcus at the station around 10:30. He showed me the documents he had found, these old ledgers and tools. He was so excited, talking about how important they were, how they proved the building's historical value. I offered him money for them, $20,000. He refused. Then what? I tried to reason with him, told him the documents would not change anything. The demolition was happening regardless. He got angry, said I was part of the corruption, that I had deliberately filed a false assessment. He said he was going to report me to the licensing board, ruin my career. Stratton's voice cracked. We argued. He turned to walk away. I saw a piece of timber on the floor, part of the structural collapse. I picked it up. I was just trying to scare him, make him listen. But then he turned back and said he had evidence of my financial troubles too, that he knew I had been paid off. And you hit him. Once from behind, he fell forward. I did not mean to kill him, I just reacted. What did you do after he fell? I panicked. I checked his pulse and he was not breathing. There was blood. I did not know what to do. I grabbed the documents he had found and threw them in the cavity where he had discovered them. Then I moved his body to a different part of the building, trying to make it look like he fell or was attacked by someone else. Did you take his phone? I smashed it. I thought there might be messages or calls that would connect us. The punch tool in his hand. I did not notice it until after. He must have grabbed it during the argument. I thought about trying to take it, but I was afraid of disturbing the scene more. What did you do with the timber? I threw it in the lake on my way home, same with my gloves. And then you went back to your apartment like nothing happened. Stratton nodded miserably. I could not sleep. I kept thinking he might not be dead, that I should call for help, but I was too scared. By morning, I had convinced myself it was too late to do anything. I just tried to act normal. Did you tell Jack what happened? I sent him a message saying the problem was handled. He responded that I had done what was necessary. The next day, I found $50,000 deposited in a cryptocurrency account in my name. Linden sat back, processing everything. Who is Jack? What is his real name? I do not know. We only communicated through an encrypted messaging app. He paid for everything through cryptocurrency or cash drops. I never knew who he worked for, just that they had serious resources. Northern Lakes Development Partners, Kowalski suggested. Maybe. Jack mentioned investors once, said they had too much at stake to let one photographer derail the project, but he never said names. Voss interjected. My client has cooperated fully. He is willing to plead guilty to manslaughter and provide testimony about this Jack person and any other conspirators. Second-degree murder, Linden said. He went to that meeting prepared to do whatever it took. He brought the financial incentive up himself. This was not a moment of passion. They negotiated for another hour before reaching an agreement. Stratton would plead guilty to second-degree murder with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In exchange, he would provide all information about his contact with the intermediary and cooperate in the investigation of Northern Lakes Development Partners. After Stratton was taken to holding, Linden sat alone in the interrogation room, exhausted. They had solved Marcus Trent's murder. They had the killer in custody, along with physical evidence and a confession. But the larger conspiracy remained frustratingly out of reach. Jack, whoever he was, had covered his tracks carefully. The encrypted messaging app routed through servers in 3 different countries. The cryptocurrency payments were laundered through multiple exchanges. The debt payoff to the unlicensed bookmakers had been done through intermediaries who claimed no knowledge of who funded it. Kowalski found her an hour later, staring at the evidence board they had built over 3 weeks. Photos of Marcus, the crime scene, the suspects, the punch tool, the ledgers, string connecting the pieces. We did good work, he said. We got the killer, Linden replied, but we did not get the people who put him up to it. Maybe we cannot, Kowalski said. Sometimes justice is incomplete, you know that. Marcus deserves better. Marcus gets his killer in prison for 3 decades. That is not nothing. Linden nodded slowly. What about Northern Lakes Development Partners? Financial Crimes Division is opening an investigation, but these corporate structures are designed to hide accountability. Could take years to unravel if we ever do. And Graham Kellerman. Clean as far as we can prove. He hired an architect who filed a sloppy assessment, not illegal. He pressured city officials to fast-track demolition. Ethically questionable, legally insulated. His grandfather's corruption is historically interesting but not prosecutable 70 years later. Linden turned away from the board, so they get away with it. Not entirely. Kellerman's reputation is destroyed. He has lost contracts worth millions. The Historical Society is pushing for landmark status on Harbinger Station. The ledgers Marcus found are going public. That was what he wanted, right? The truth coming out. He wanted to live, Linden said quietly. Yeah, but we cannot give him that. They walked out of the station together into the cold night. Snow was falling again, heavy and silent. Linden looked up at the sky, thinking about Marcus Trent standing in Harbinger Station with his camera, documenting something he believed mattered. Thinking about Peter Stratton picking up that piece of timber. One decision, one moment, cascading into tragedy. She thought about the encrypted messages they would probably never fully trace. the investment group that would likely never face charges. The systematic pressure to erase history for profit, playing out in city after city, most of it never discovered, never challenged. Marcus had challenged it, and it had killed him. But his photographs would be archived. His documentation would become part of a historical record. The station might be saved. The ledgers would tell their story of corruption. It was not justice in its complete form, but it was something. Linden drove home through empty streets, the case file on the passenger seat beside her. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for trial. The forensic team would process the remaining evidence. The financial investigators would try to follow the money trail, however cold it had gone. Tonight she would try to sleep, knowing that Marcus Trent's killer would face consequences, even if the people who had motivated that killing remained in shadows. It was the nature of this work. You solved what you could. You documented what you found. You built the case with the evidence available. You did not always get everyone, but you got someone. And sometimes that had to be enough. The conference room at the Duluth Police Department felt smaller than usual. Detective Sarah Linden sat across from Peter Stratton and his attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen who had driven up from Minneapolis at dawn. Outside, the first pale light of morning struggled against low clouds that promised more snow. Stratton looked diminished. The ambitious young architect who had smiled confidently in his firm photo now hunched forward, hands clasped on the scarred table. 2 days of running had left him hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing borrowed clothes from the county lockup. Chen spread documents across the table with practiced efficiency. "My client is prepared to make a statement," she said. "In exchange, we are requesting consideration for a plea agreement. Second-degree murder, possibility of parole." Linden glanced at Ray Kowalski, who stood against the wall, arms folded. The prosecutor, a veteran named Diane Ortiz, sat beside Linden. She had reviewed the evidence thoroughly before this meeting. "We will listen," Ortiz said carefully. "No promises until we hear what he has to say." Chen nodded to Stratton. He swallowed hard, looked down at his hands. "I did not plan to kill him," Stratton began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want that understood. I did not go there intending for anyone to die." Linden activated the recording device. "Start from the beginning. How did you first become involved with Marcus Trent?" Stratton drew a shaky breath. "He called me about 6 weeks before it happened. He had seen the structural assessment report my firm filed for Harbinger Station. He said we had deliberately omitted historical features that should have triggered a preservation review. He was not wrong." "Why did your firm omit those features?" Ortiz asked. "Pressure from the partners. Kellerman Development is one of our biggest clients. They wanted those demolition permits pushed through fast. The waterfront properties are part of a larger redevelopment project worth tens of millions. Delays would cost serious money. I was told to keep the report clean and simple. Focus on structural integrity. Skip the historical analysis." "Did you object?" Linden asked. Stratton shook his head. "I am a junior architect. I do what I am told. I signed off on the report. I thought it would be fine, that no one would dig deeper." He laughed bitterly. Then Marcus called. "What did Marcus want from you?" "At first, just acknowledgement. He wanted me to confirm that the firm had minimized the historical significance. He talked about filing complaints with the State Historical Society, going to the media. I tried to calm him down, told him I would look into it. I thought maybe I could convince him to let it go, or at least delay until after the permits cleared." Kowalski shifted against the wall, but Marcus did not let it go. "No, he found the documents, the old ledgers hidden in the building. He called me 3 days before he died, said he had proof that Harbinger Station was connected to a major corruption scandal in the 1940s. He said the building should be preserved as a historical site. that the whole demolition was built on covering up the past. Stratton rubbed his face. I panicked. I told my supervisor about the call. Word got back to the partners. They were furious. The permits were already approved. Demolition was scheduled. If Marcus went public with historical evidence, everything would be tied up in reviews for years. What happened next? Linden kept her voice neutral, giving him space to talk. Someone approached me, not directly from the firm, through an intermediary, a lawyer I had never met. He knew about my gambling debts. I owe money to people who do not forgive debts. $70,000. The lawyer said the debt could disappear, plus $50,000 cash. All I had to do was convince Marcus to walk away. Convince him how? Ortiz asked. However necessary. The lawyer was not specific. He gave me a burner phone, told me to use an encrypted app for updates. He said Marcus was a problem that needed to be solved quietly. I thought maybe I could just buy the documents from him, offer him money to keep quiet and move on. Linden leaned forward, but Marcus did not want money. Stratton shook his head. I met him at Harbinger Station the night he died. He agreed to meet me there at 11. It was freezing, snowing lightly. The building was dark. I brought a flashlight and $20,000 in cash. I figured if I offered enough, he would take it. Did Marcus come alone? Yes, he had a camera bag and a backpack. He was documenting everything, always taking pictures. He showed me the ledgers, original documents from 1947 showing cargo fraud, bribes, names of officials involved. Graham Kellerman's grandfather was implicated. Marcus said the documents proved Harbinger Station was historically significant, that it should be preserved as evidence of institutional corruption. Stratton's voice cracked. I offered him the money. I begged him to take it and let the demolition proceed. I told him no one cared about corruption from 70 years ago, that he was ruining careers and projects for nothing. He got angry, said I was exactly the kind of person who let corruption continue, who prioritized money over truth. He called me a coward. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the heating system. Outside, snow began to fall again. He said he was going to the media the next day. He had copies of the documents, witness statements, everything documented. He said people deserve to know their city's history, even the ugly parts. He said I should be ashamed for helping cover it up. What did you do? Linden asked quietly. I lost control. I grabbed his arm, tried to take the documents. He shoved me back. We struggled. There was construction debris everywhere, old timber, broken beams. I picked up a piece of wood, maybe 2 feet long, heavy. I do not even remember making the decision. I just swung it, hit him in the back of the head. Stratton covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. He fell forward, dropped everything, blood everywhere. I stood there, not believing what I had done. He was still conscious at first, trying to crawl toward his bag. I hit him again, and then he stopped moving. Chen put a hand on Stratton's arm, but he continued. I panicked completely. I tried to clean up the blood, but there was too much. I moved his body to a different part of the building, somewhere that looked like he might have fallen or had an accident. I smashed his phone so no one could trace his messages to me. I took the ledgers, the documents, everything. I was going to burn them, destroy all of it. But you did not destroy the documents, Ortiz said. Stratton shook his head. I could not bring myself to do it. They were real historical records, important. I hid them in my apartment, thought maybe I could return them anonymously later. I know how insane that sounds now. What about the punch tool? Linden asked. Why was Marcus holding it when we found him? I did not know he had it until you found his body. He must have grabbed it during the struggle, held onto it even after I hit him. I did not notice in the dark. I was too focused on getting out of there. Stratton looked up, eyes red. I drove home, burned my clothes, tried to act normal. The next day when I heard they found his body, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. But then the investigation seemed to focus on other people. His ex-girlfriend, Graham Kellerman, that dock worker, I thought maybe I had gotten away with it. Kowalski spoke for the first time. Who was the intermediary, the lawyer who approached you? I do not know his real name. He called himself Mitchell. We only met twice, always in parking garages, always at night. He paid my debts within 24 hours of our first meeting. Sent confirmation through the encrypted app. After Marcus died, I sent him a message saying the problem was resolved. He replied that I should destroy the phone and never contact him again. That was it. Did Mitchell know you were going to kill Marcus? Ortiz asked. He never said it explicitly, but the way he talked, the money he offered, the instructions about being discreet, I think he knew violence was possible, maybe even expected it. I cannot prove that, but I think whoever sent him wanted Marcus silenced permanently. Linden exchanged glances with Ortiz. The intermediary was the missing link, the connection to whoever had orchestrated this from the shadows. Without the phone or concrete evidence, proving conspiracy would be nearly impossible. Where are the ledgers now? Linden asked. Chen slid a handwritten note across the table. Address of a storage unit rented under a false name. My client has provided the key and access code. The documents are intact. The interrogation continued for another 2 hours. Stratton walked them through every detail, every decision, every moment of that night. His attorney negotiated carefully, securing agreement that the confession would support a second-degree murder plea rather than going to trial. By the time they finished, full daylight had arrived, gray and cold. Stratton was led back to his cell. Linden and Kowalski stood in the hallway, exhausted. He is telling the truth, Kowalski said, about the killing anyway. Whether he is protecting someone higher up, that is harder to say. The intermediary is the key, Linden agreed. But without the phone, without more concrete evidence, we will never prove who hired him. Ortiz joined them, closing her briefcase. We have enough for the murder charge. The conspiracy angle is thin. Investment groups have lawyers who know how to insulate themselves. Unless we find Mitchell or get electronic evidence linking him to specific individuals, the murder stops with Stratton. Linden felt the familiar frustration of an incomplete solution. Justice for Marcus, yes, but the larger corruption would remain untouched, protected by layers of corporate structure and legal barriers. The storage unit yielded exactly what Stratton had described. The historical ledgers, carefully preserved in waterproof containers, exactly as Marcus had found them. Also present were Marcus's copies, his notes, his research, everything needed to prove Harbinger Station's historical significance. Dr. Patricia Horn arrived at the police station within an hour of being notified. She handled the documents with reverence, tears streaming down her weathered face. "This is extraordinary," she whispered, turning pages carefully. Marcus was right. These are primary sources documenting systematic corruption. The names, the dates, the cargo manifests. This changes everything we thought we knew about Duluth's maritime history in the post-war period. Linden watched her work. Will this be enough to stop the demolition? Absolutely. These documents establish Harbinger Station as a site of historical significance under state and federal preservation law. The building will have to undergo formal review. That process takes months, sometimes years. Graham Kellerman's demolition permits are worthless now. Over the following weeks, the case against Peter Stratton moved forward with procedural inevitability. His confession, combined with physical evidence, made conviction certain. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement, second-degree murder, life sentence with possibility of parole after 30 years. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray morning in April. The courtroom was packed with media, preservation advocates, and the curious. Elena Vasquez sat in the back row, her face carefully neutral. Dr. Horn attended, as did several members of Marcus Trent's estranged family who had emerged once the case became national news. Judge Warren Mitchell, no relation to the mysterious intermediary, reviewed the case file thoroughly before speaking. Mr. Stratton, you have pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of Marcus Trent. The evidence presented shows that you acted out of financial desperation, under pressure from forces that saw Mr. Trent as an obstacle to profitable development. While you did not premeditate this murder, you made a choice that night. You chose violence over conscience. You chose personal benefit over another man's life. The judge paused, looking directly at Stratton. Marcus Trent died because he cared about truth. He died because he believed history matters, that corruption should not be buried, that communities deserve to know their past. You killed him to protect a development project, to satisfy gambling debts, to advance a career. That choice has consequences. Stratton stood motionless as the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 30 years. He would be 59 years old before he could even apply for release. As guards led him away, Stratton looked once at the gallery. His eyes found Elena Vasquez. Whatever passed between them in that moment was private, unreadable. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Dr. Horn. She had become the public face of the preservation movement that had grown around Harbinger Station. Today is not just about justice for Marcus Trent, she said, voice strong despite her age. It is about recognizing that history has value, that buildings tell stories, that we must preserve evidence of our past even when that past is uncomfortable. Marcus gave his life for that principle. We honor him by ensuring Harbinger Station survives. The investigation into the investment group and the intermediary continued, but produced little actionable evidence. The encrypted app Stratton had used was traced to a server in Eastern Europe, long since shut down. The phone records showed no direct communication between Stratton and any identified individual connected to Kellerman Development or the investment consortium. The corporate attorney who had purchased the laptop used for encrypted communications maintained his story. The laptop had been stolen from his car weeks before the murder. Security footage from the parking garage where the theft allegedly occurred had been overwritten. Without physical evidence or witness testimony directly linking anyone to conspiracy, the prosecutor's office could not pursue charges. Graham Kellerman held a press conference distancing himself from Stratton and expressing shock at the murder. He acknowledged that his firm had pressured architects to expedite assessments, but characterized this as standard business practice, not criminal conspiracy. His lawyers successfully blocked attempts to subpoena internal communications, citing attorney-client privilege and proprietary business information. 2 city council members who had fast-tracked demolition permits quietly resigned, citing personal reasons. Ethics investigations were opened but ultimately produced only administrative penalties. The systemic corruption remained largely intact, adapted, learned to be more careful. Elena Vasquez resigned from her architecture firm 3 weeks after the sentencing. She released a public statement acknowledging her failure to report Marcus's discoveries and her prioritization of career over ethical responsibility. She took a position with a Minneapolis nonprofit focused on historical preservation and adaptive reuse of industrial structures. Linden received a handwritten letter from Elena 2 months later. Detective Linden, I want to thank you for your thoroughness and integrity throughout this investigation. I live every day with the knowledge that if I had listened to Marcus, if I had taken him seriously, he might still be alive. That weight does not go away. I have redirected my career toward the work he cared about, but it feels inadequate. I know this does not change what happened, but I wanted you to know that his death did change someone. I will spend the rest of my career fighting for the kind of preservation he believed in. It is the only amends I can make. Tommy Oakes completed his community service without incident and enrolled in a technical college program for industrial safety inspection. He avoided media attention, declined interview requests, tried to rebuild his life quietly. The money he had taken from the intermediary haunted him, though legally he had not committed prosecutable crimes beyond the false statements he had already admitted. Harbinger Station's fate shifted dramatically. The historical ledgers were authenticated, digitized, and made publicly available through the Minnesota Historical Society. The documentation of corruption involving prominent Duluth families in the 1940s became the subject of academic papers, documentary proposals, and heated public debate. The city council, facing intense public pressure and legal challenges, voted to halt demolition and initiate a formal historical review. The process confirmed what Marcus had discovered. Harbinger Station qualified for both state and National Historic Register status due to its connection to significant criminal justice history and its architectural representation of mid-century railway infrastructure. Dr. Horn led the effort to transform the building into a museum and educational center. Funding came from a combination of state grants, federal preservation money, and donations from residents who had been moved by Marcus's story. The irony was not lost on anyone that the building Marcus died trying to save would now be preserved because of his death. The museum opened 18 months after the murder. The main gallery featured an exhibit titled Evidence and Consequence, the Price of Hidden History. Marcus Trent's photographs of Harbinger Station lined the walls, professional quality images capturing the building's deterioration and beauty. His camera, recovered from the crime scene, was displayed alongside the railway punch tool that had become the case's symbolic center. A memorial plaque in the entrance read, "Dedicated to Marcus Trent, whose dedication to historical truth cost him his life. May this building stand as testament that some stories demand to be told, no matter the risk." Detective Sarah Linden attended the opening on a cold Saturday morning in October. She stood alone in the gallery, studying Marcus's photographs. The images revealed an artist's eye, someone who saw beauty in decay, meaning in abandoned spaces. Each photograph was carefully composed, technically excellent. Elena Vasquez arrived quietly, placing a bouquet of white lilies at the memorial plaque. She stood for a long moment, head bowed, then turned and saw Linden watching. They approached each other slowly, meeting in the center of the gallery. "I did not think you would come," Elena said softly. "He deserves to be remembered," Linden replied, "not just as a victim, but as someone who cared enough to risk everything." Elena looked around at the photographs, the restored architecture, the visitors beginning to fill the space. All of this exists because he died. That does not seem like justice. "No," Linden agreed, "it is not justice. Justice would be Marcus alive, showing these photographs himself, giving tour of the building, finishing his documentary. This is just what comes after, memory instead of presence." They stood in silence for a while. Dr. Horn gave a speech welcoming visitors, explaining the building's history, acknowledging Marcus's role in saving it. Local officials spoke about the importance of preservation and transparency in government. The words were sincere, but felt inadequate against the weight of what had been lost. As the ceremony concluded and crowds dispersed into the museum's various exhibits, Linden found herself drawn to a small side gallery that had been set up as a replica of Marcus's apartment workspace. His research materials, photographs, handwritten notes, all preserved exactly as they had been found. A video monitor showed interview footage with people who had known Marcus, his ex-girlfriend before Elena, talking about his passion for forgotten places, a former professor describing his natural talent for documentary photography, Dr. Horn recounting their conversations about railway history and the importance of preserving difficult truths. What emerged was a portrait of someone driven by curiosity and principle, someone who could not walk past abandoned buildings without wondering about their stories, someone who believed documentation itself was a form of activism. Linden understood that impulse. Her own insomnia often led her to old case files, unsolved mysteries, the ones that got away. The need to make sense of chaos, to impose order through investigation and evidence. Marcus had done the same thing with buildings and history. Outside, snow began falling again, the first of the season. Linden stood at a window overlooking Lake Superior, watching white flakes disappear into dark water. The harbor beyond showed signs of ongoing development, new condominiums rising where warehouses once stood, the waterfront transforming, erasing its industrial past in favor of luxury housing and tourist attractions. Some of those projects had been delayed now, subject to historical reviews and preservation challenges inspired by the Harbinger station case. But most would proceed. The development would continue. Money and political influence would find ways around preservation laws, just as they always had. Linden thought about the intermediary, the mysterious Mitchell who had approached Peter Stratton. He was still out there somewhere, along with whoever had hired him. They had won and lost simultaneously. The specific project they wanted to protect had been stopped, but their identities remained hidden. They would be more careful next time, more insulated, harder to trace. That was the frustrating reality of investigating institutional corruption. You could catch the person who swung the weapon, sometimes even the person who paid for the hit. But the systems that created the conditions for violence, the networks of influence and money that saw human lives as obstacles to profit, those rarely faced consequences. Kowalski found her by the window. "You okay?" "Just thinking." Dangerous habit. He handed her a cup of coffee from the museum cafe. "This is good work, Linden. We got justice for Marcus. Not perfect, but real. We got accountability for his murder. That is not the same as justice." "It never is." Kowalski sipped his coffee. "But the building is saved. His photographs are seen. The story is told. That counts for something." Linden nodded slowly. "Does it bother you that we could not touch the people who set this in motion? The investment group, Kellerman's partners, whoever hired Mitchell?" "Every day, but I have been doing this job for 30 years. You learn to accept incomplete victories. We cannot solve systemic problems with individual prosecutions. All we can do is handle the cases in front of us as best we can." They watched visitors explore the museum, families with children, elderly couples, students on field trips. All of them learning about railway corruption, structural preservation, the costs of hidden history. Seeds planted, Linden supposed. Maybe some of them would grow into citizens who questioned development projects, demanded transparency, valued truth over convenience. "You did good work on this," Kowalski said. "Thorough, careful. You did not let the complexity distract you from finding the truth. Marcus did the real work. We just followed his evidence. He died for it. We made sure it mattered." Linden finished her coffee, set the empty cup on a windowsill. "I keep thinking about what Stratton said, that he did not plan to kill him, that he just lost control." "You think he was lying?" "No, I think he was telling the truth, and that is somehow worse. Marcus died because someone made a decision in anger under pressure without thinking about consequences. Not because of some elaborate murder plot, just because Stratton was weak and desperate and violent when it mattered most." "Most murders are like that," Kowalski said quietly. "People imagine criminal masterminds, but mostly it is just scared, stupid people making terrible choices." They left the museum as afternoon light began to fade. The temperature was dropping, winter asserting itself early this year. Linden drove through downtown Duluth, past the courthouse where Stratton had been sentenced, past the police station where they had built the case. Her apartment felt empty and cold. She turned up the heat, made tea, tried to settle, but sleep would not come easily, as always. She found herself reviewing case files, not this one but others. The open cases, the unsolved mysteries, the ones that still needed answers. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister in Minneapolis, checking in, asking how she was doing. Linden typed a brief response, said she was fine, promised to call soon. The conversation felt hollow but necessary, maintaining connections even when they felt inadequate. She thought about Marcus living alone in his apartment, walls covered with photographs and research, relationships strained by his obsessive focus on abandoned buildings and hidden histories. He had sacrificed normal human connection for his work, just as Linden often did. The parallel was uncomfortable. The difference was Marcus had found something worth dying for, a principle, a truth, a building that mattered. Linden just had cases, the endless procedural machinery of crime and punishment. She solved murders because that was what detectives did, not because she believed it would change anything fundamental. But maybe that was enough. Maybe doing the job well, finding truth, holding people accountable when possible, that was all anyone could do. The rest was beyond individual control, part of larger systems and structures that resisted change through sheer inertia and concentrated power. Weeks turned into months. The case receded from headlines, replaced by new scandals and tragedies. Harbinger Station Museum became an established part of Duluth's cultural landscape, popular with tourists and school groups. Marcus Trent's story was told hundreds of times, each guided tour explaining how one man's determination to uncover hidden history had led to both his death and the building's salvation. Linden moved on to new cases, as detectives always do. A domestic violence homicide, an arson investigation, a suspicious overdose. Each one demanding attention, evidence gathering, witness interviews, the careful construction of provable truth. But she thought about Marcus Trent often, not just as a victim in a closed case, but as someone who had believed something mattered enough to risk everything. That kind of conviction was rare, dangerous certainly. It had gotten him killed, but also admirable in its purity. On the anniversary of the murder, Linden returned to Harbinger Station. The museum was hosting a special event, a talk by Dr. Horn about the ongoing research into the historical corruption documents Marcus had recovered. The building was packed, standing room only. Linden stood in the back, listening. Dr. Horn had aged in the past year, moved slower, but her voice remained strong. We often think of history as something distant and safe, Dr. Horn said. Events that happened long ago to people who are gone, but history is not safe. It is uncomfortable, challenging, sometimes dangerous to uncover. Marcus understood that. He knew that powerful people benefit when history stays buried, when inconvenient truths remain hidden. She paused, looking around the room. This building stands because one person refused to let history be erased. He paid the ultimate price for that refusal, but his work continues. Every document we analyze, every story we uncover, every student who learns about institutional corruption and the importance of transparency, that is Marcus's legacy. After the talk, Linden walked through the exhibits alone. The museum had expanded since opening, adding new galleries about Duluth's maritime history, labor movements, immigration patterns. Marcus's photographs remained central, his artistic eye giving dignity to forgotten spaces and overlooked stories. The railway punch tool was still displayed in its glass case, labeled with its full history. Below it, new text had been added. This tool was used by Railway Inspector James Carrick to authenticate cargo certifications in the 1940s. When Carrick discovered systematic corruption, he hid evidence including this tool and detailed ledgers in Harbinger Station before disappearing, likely murdered for his attempted whistleblowing. 72 years later, photographer Marcus Trent recovered these hidden documents. In a tragic echo of history, Trent was also killed for uncovering the truth. This tool, clutched in his hand when found, represents the dangerous courage required to document corruption and demand accountability. Linden stared at the tool for a long time, Two men, separated by generations, both killed for caring about truth. The symmetry was almost poetic in a dark way. History did not repeat, but it certainly echoed. Outside, early evening was settling over the waterfront. The temperature had dropped sharply, ice forming at the edges of the harbor. Linden walked along the dock, past the restored buildings and new developments, a carefully managed blend of historical preservation and modern commerce. She understood now what bothered her most about the case. It was not just that the larger conspiracy had escaped prosecution, though that frustrated her deeply. It was the realization that Marcus's death had been almost accidental, a consequence of someone else's weakness rather than organized malice. Peter Stratton had not been hired to commit murder. He had been hired to solve a problem, and he had solved it in the most brutal, irreversible way possible. If Stratton had been stronger, if he had refused the money, if he had walked away from the meeting, Marcus would still be alive. All the evidence Marcus had gathered would have come to light anyway. Harbinger station would have been saved. The only difference would be Marcus living to see it, to finish his documentary, to continue his work. Instead, fear and desperation and gambling debt had created the conditions for violence. The rest followed with terrible inevitability. Detective work taught you that crime was not mysterious. It was banal, predictable, driven by basic human weakness: greed, fear, anger, desperation. The same motives repeated endlessly, just with different names and locations. Solving crime meant understanding those patterns, following evidence, building cases. But understanding did not make it less frustrating. Justice was always incomplete, always compromised by the limits of law and evidence. You could punish the person who swung the weapon, sometimes the person who gave the order. But the systems that created violence, that allowed corruption to flourish, those remained largely untouched. Linden's phone buzzed. Another case, another victim, another investigation beginning. She read the details, mentally shifting gears, preparing for what came next. Before leaving, she looked back at Harbinger Station one final time. Lights glowed in the windows, visitors visible inside, learning and discussing and engaging with history. The building that had nearly been demolished now stood as testament to one person's conviction that truth mattered, even at terrible cost. Marcus Trent had not set out to become a martyr. He had just been someone who could not ignore what he discovered, could not walk away from evidence of corruption, could not let a building be destroyed when it held important stories. That integrity had killed him, but it had also saved what he cared about. Linden drove toward the new crime scene, windshield wipers clearing fresh snow. The work continued as it always did. Cases opened and closed, criminals were caught or escaped, justice was served or denied. Individual detectives could only control their own actions, their own thoroughness, their own commitment to finding truth. The larger problems, the systemic corruption, the institutional violence, those required different solutions. Political will, structural reform, cultural change. Not detective work, but civic engagement, the kind Marcus Trent had attempted through documentation and preservation advocacy. Maybe that was the real lesson, that fighting corruption required multiple approaches, multiple people working in different ways. Detectives solved individual crimes, photographers documented hidden histories, historians preserved uncomfortable truths, activists pushed for policy change. No one person could do it all, but each contribution mattered. Marcus had done his part, Linden had done hers. The case was closed as much as any case truly closes. Justice was incomplete but real. Memory was preserved. The building stood. It would have to be enough because it was all that was possible. In a world where power protected itself and truth was dangerous, small victories were all you could hope for. You solved the cases you could, you held accountable the people you could reach, you documented what happened so future generations might learn. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very thorough, You prevented one building from being demolished, told one story that deserved telling, gave one death meaning beyond senseless violence. The snow fell harder as night settled over Duluth. The city lights reflected off the lake, buildings glowing against dark water. Somewhere in that landscape, other secrets waited to be discovered, other crimes waited to be solved, other truths waited to be told. Detective Sarah Linden drove toward the next case, the next investigation, the next attempt at incomplete justice. Behind her, Harbinger station stood solid and permanent, no longer harboring secrets, only memory. The railway punch tool rested in its glass case, silent evidence that some people still believed truth was worth dying for, even in a world that often proved them wrong.